The 38th ship I destroyed was the one I started counting from. Not because the first 37 didn't matter, they did. Each one mattered in the specific technical way that ordnance expenditure matters: fuel costs, munitions replacement, after-action paperwork, the small administrative irritation of logging another confirmed kill in a system that already had 37 just like it. They mattered the way breathing matters. You don't remember individual breaths. You just keep doing it. But number 38, that one had a name. Not the ship. The ship was a converted Rathani mineral hauler, late generation, stripped of its cargo arms and refitted with what I assume was supposed to be radiation shielding, but was actually just layered industrial hull plating bolted over the sensor-facing surfaces. It came through the Kessler boundary at 0347 station time, beacon dark, transponder either disabled or absent, velocity consistent with a coasting approach, engines cut early to reduce thermal signature. Standard pattern. We'd seen 100 like it. The name belonged to the pilot. He broadcast it. Open channel, no encryption, no tactical formatting. Just a voice, mid-register, slightly nasal, speaking standard with the clipped vowels of someone who'd learned it from trade recordings rather than conversation. Terran Border Station, this is Korev San, citizen registration Vetha-4419-Osik, formerly of the Rathani administrative province of Ilsthen. I am carrying 19 passengers, including 4 juveniles. I am aware of your territorial boundary. I am aware of your standing enforcement order. I cannot turn back. The space behind me is no longer habitable for my species. I am requesting. I fired at the third sentence. That's not cruelty. That's doctrine. The standing order for Kessler Boundary Station 7. My station for the past 14 months is unambiguous. Any vessel crossing the territorial demarcation line without prior diplomatic clearance is to be engaged with lethal force. No warning shot protocol. No boarding procedure. No negotiation window. The order doesn't distinguish between warships, merchant vessels, and refugee barges. It doesn't add. The 38th ship I destroyed was the one I started counting from. Not because the first 37 didn't matter. They did. Each one mattered in the specific technical way that ordnance expenditure matters: fuel costs, munitions replacement, after-action paperwork. Ask me to check the passenger manifest. It doesn't care about juveniles. The order cares about the line. The small administrative irritation of logging another confirmed kill in a system that already had 37 just like it. They mattered the way breathing matters. You don't remember individual breaths, you just keep doing it. But number 38, that one had a name. Not the ship. The ship was a converted Rathani mineral hauler, late generation, stripped of its cargo arms and refitted with what I assume was supposed to be radiation shielding, but was actually just layered industrial hull plating bolted over the sensor-facing surfaces. It came through the Kessler boundary at 0347 station time, beacon dark, transponder either disabled or absent, velocity consistent with a coasting approach, engines cut early to reduce thermal signature. Standard pattern. We'd seen 100 like it. The name belonged to the pilot. He broadcast it. Open channel, no encryption, no tactical formatting, just a voice, mid-register, slightly nasal, speaking standard with the clipped vowels of someone who'd learned it from trade recordings rather than conversation. Terran Border Station, this is Korev San, citizen registration Vetha-4419-Osik. My name is Corporal James Maddox. I am 23 years old. I operate a Terran Defense Perimeter Weapons Platform designated KBS-7, mounted on a converted mine formerly of the Rathani administrative province of Ilsthen. I am carrying 19 passengers, including 4 juveniles. I am aware of your territorial boundary. I am aware of your standing enforcement order. I cannot turn back. The space behind me is no longer habitable for my species. I am requesting anchor in the outer belt of the Kessler system, and for the past 14 months, I have been the lowest-ranking human being with the authority to kill on behalf of my species. I fired at the third sentence. That's not cruelty. That's doctrine. The standing order for Kessler Boundary Station 7. My station for the past 14 months is unambiguous. Any vessel crossing the territorial demarcation line without prior diplomatic clearance is to be engaged with lethal force. No warning shot protocol. No boarding procedure. No negotiation window. The order doesn't distinguish between warships, merchant vessels, and refugee barges. It doesn't ask me to check the passenger manifest. It doesn't care about juveniles. The order cares about the line. The authority is generous. The rank is not. I share the station with 3 other people. Sergeant Robert Voss runs the operations center and signs off on my engagement logs. Specialist Travis Olin maintains the sensor grid and the communications array. And PFC Kyle Dunn handles the power plant. My name is Corporal James Maddox. I am 23 years old. I operate a Terran Defense Perimeter Weapons Platform designated KBS-7, mounted on a converted mining anchor in the outer belt of the Kessler system. And for the past 14 months, I have been the lowest-ranking human being with the authority to kill on behalf of my species, the recyclers, and the kind of structural maintenance that keeps a 40-year-old mining platform from decompressing while you sleep. Voss has been out here for 3 years. The authority is generous. The rank is not. I share the station with 3 other people. Sergeant Robert Voss runs the operations center and signs off on my engagement logs. Specialist Travis Olin maintains the sensor grid and the communications array. And PFC Kyle Dunn handles the power plant. Olin for 2, Dunn for 9 months. I have been here the second longest, which means I have destroyed more ships than anyone currently on the station. The recyclers, and the kind of structural maintenance that keeps a 40-year-old mining platform from decompressing while you sleep. Voss has been out here for 3 years. Olin for 2, Dunn for 9 months. I have been here the second longest, which means I have destroyed more ships than anyone currently on the station. The record before me was held by a corporal named Ethan Marsh, who was rotated out 7 months ago after what his transfer paperwork described as acute operational fatigue, and what Voss, who knew him, described as he stopped sleeping and started talking to the bulkheads. The record before me was held by a corporal named Ethan Marsh, who was rotated out 7 months ago after what his transfer paperwork described as acute operational fatigue, and what Voss, who knew him, described as he stopped sleeping and started talking to the bulkheads. I understand Marsh now better than I did when Voss first told me that story. Here is what the Kessler boundary is, for anyone listening to this who doesn't already know. In 2038, the Terran Confederacy formally declared a sovereign exclusion zone encompassing all systems within 42 light-years of Sol. I understand Marsh now better than I did when Voss first told me that story. Here is what the Kessler boundary is, for anyone listening to this who doesn't already know. In 2038, the Terran Confederacy formally declared a sovereign exclusion zone encompassing all systems within 42 light-years of Sol. The declaration followed the Third Incursion War, 3 years of hit-and-run raiding by Selvari privateers operating out of the contested Vane Reach, targeting colonial shipping, and, in 4 documented cases, striking surface populations on frontier worlds. The declaration followed the Third Incursion War, 3 years of hit-and-run raiding by Selvari privateers operating out of the contested Vane Reach, targeting colonial. The war ended when the Terran Navy burned the Reach clean and the Selvari Dominion signed the Accord of Mutual Distance. But the raids had changed the political calculus, shipping and, in 4 documented cases, striking surface populations on frontier worlds. 40 years of cautious, expanding diplomacy with the galactic community ended, and what replaced it was a perimeter. The war ended when the Terran Navy burned the Reach clean, and the Selvari Dominion signed the Accord of Mutual Distance. But the raids had changed the political calculus. 40 years of cautious, expanding diplomacy with the galactic community ended, and what replaced it was a perimeter. Not a wall you can't wall off space, but you can declare a line, publicize the coordinates in every language and on every frequency, and make the cost of crossing it absolute. That's what the Kessler boundary is. 78 stations arranged in a shell around Terran space, each one crewed by 4 people. Each one armed with enough directed energy capacity to crack a cruiser's spine. Each one operating under the same standing order I operate under. Cross the line, you die. It's on the beacons. It's in the navigational databases of every species with FTL capability. It's etched into the treaty frameworks of 14 interstellar governments. The Rethani Consortium, the Selvari Dominion, the Bravari Federation, the Corvain Empire, the Davari Assembly. Every major power in this part of the galaxy has acknowledged the boundary, agreed to its terms, and integrated it into their own navigational law. No one can claim they didn't know. So when Korev-san came through at 0347 with his 19 passengers and his 4 juveniles and his carefully rehearsed statement of awareness, he knew. He knew exactly what he was flying into. He knew the line was real. He knew the order was real. He knew I was real. And he came anyway. I think about that. I think about it more than I should. Which is to say, I think about it at all. Because the order doesn't ask me to think. The order asks me to fire. And I fired. And the mineral hauler's plating held for about 9/10 of a second before the directed energy beam cut through the industrial overlay and found the hull beneath. And the hull was nothing civilian grade, meant to keep atmosphere in and micrometeorites out, not to resist a military-grade weapon system operating at a range of 11,000 kilometers. The kill was clean. They're always clean. That's the thing about directed energy weapons at close range. There's no ambiguity, no tumbling wreckage spinning off into the dark, no distress beacon triggering after the hit, no escape pods. The beam converts the hull to plasma, and the plasma converts the contents to plasma, and what's left is an expanding cloud of ionized gas that the sensors track for about 40 minutes before it disperses below detection threshold. 19 people, 4 juveniles, 1 name, Korev-san. I logged the engagement. Voss signed off. Olin confirmed the sensor track. Dunn didn't say anything because Dunn was asleep, and even if he'd been awake, Dunn doesn't talk about the kills anymore. None of us do, except in the precise, formal language required by the after-action report. But I started counting from 38. Not because the kill was different, not because the doctrine was wrong, not because I disagreed with the order, because he said his name. I need to explain the geography before any of this makes sense. The Kessler system is nothing. That's not a judgment, it's a description. A red dwarf with 3 rocky bodies too small to qualify as planets, and a sparse asteroid belt that was mined out before I was born. No colonies, no installations, no strategic value except position. Kessler sits on the border like a broken tooth. The space around it is the space things come through when they come through, because the stellar density in this part of the arm creates a natural corridor, and Kessler is the last star system before the corridor opens into Terran-claimed volume. The station itself orbits the second rock at a Lagrange point that gives us line of sight across the corridor's mouth. On a clear sensor day, no stellar weather, no background radiation spikes. Olin can track an inbound contact at 12 hours out. That's 12 hours of watching something approach the line. 12 hours of knowing what's going to happen when it gets here. Most days, nothing comes through. The corridor is empty. The beacons pulse their warnings in 14 languages on rotation, and the void absorbs them, and the void sends nothing back. I spend those days maintaining the weapons platform, running diagnostics, exercising in the cramped compartment Dunn welded a pull-up bar into, and reading. Voss reads 2 military history, mostly the old Earth campaigns. Olin plays strategy games against himself on a tablet with a cracked screen. Dunn sleeps. We are not a combat unit. We are 4 people in a box with a gun, pointed at a door. When something comes through the door, we shoot it. For most of the 14 months I've been here, that's been enough. The logic is sound. I believe in the perimeter, or I believed in it, which is the same thing when you're the one pulling the trigger. The Third Incursion War killed 11,000 Terran civilians, 11,000 people who were minding their own business on frontier worlds when Selvari raiders dropped out of FTL and opened fire on population centers. 11,000 reasons to draw a line and mean it. And for 8 years after the boundary was established, it worked. Not because the perimeter is physically impenetrable, 78 stations can't cover every approach vector, and a determined military fleet could punch through in a dozen places. The perimeter works because the cost is known. You cross, you die. The certainty is the weapon, the will to enforce it, demonstrated consistently over years without exception, without hesitation, without mercy. That's the wall. I was part of the wall. I was good at being part of the wall. Then the Rithani started dying. Not from us, not from the perimeter, from their own space, their own governments, their own catastrophic failures of resource management and political will. The Rithani Consortium, the largest polity in the near-galactic arm, 400 systems, 16 billion citizens, began to collapse inward about 2 years ago. The specifics depend on who you ask. Olin, who follows the intelligence briefings more closely than any of us, says it was a combination of agricultural blight across their core worlds and a ruling caste power struggle that diverted emergency resources into military positioning. Voss says it's simpler than that. The consortium was a pyramid, and pyramids fall. Whatever the cause, the effect was displacement. Millions, then tens of millions, then hundreds of millions of Rethani civilians fleeing the core systems, moving outward, moving through neutral space, moving toward any border that wasn't collapsing behind them, moving toward us. The first refugee ship came through Kessler 9 months ago. I destroyed it. It was a cargo shuttle with no weapons, no shields, and what the sensor data later suggested was a passenger count of approximately 40. I didn't know they were refugees at the time. The intelligence briefings hadn't caught up yet. All I knew was that an uncleared vessel had crossed the line, and the order said fire. The second came 2 days later, then the third. Then for a week, nothing. Then 4 in a single day. By the 3rd month, we were averaging 2 contacts per week. By the 6th month, 3. By the 8th month, the number had stabilized at 4 or 5, not because fewer were coming, but because the corridor was getting crowded enough that some ships were turning back when they detected the debris fields. Yes, debris fields. That's what 9 months of enforcement looks like. A thin haze of particulate matter spreading across the corridor mouth, the atomized remains of ships and passengers slowly dispersing into the interstellar medium. On certain sensor frequencies, if Olin tunes the array a particular way, you can see it. A faint diffuse cloud, barely distinguishable from background radiation, marking the place where the corridor meets Terran space. I have destroyed, as of last night, as of the engagement that prompted me to start this record, 109 vessels at the Kessler boundary. My best estimate, based on the intelligence briefs and the typical capacity of the ship types involved, is that those 109 vessels contained between 2,000 and 2,400 people. I am Corporal James Maddox. I am 23 years old, and I have killed more people than some of the war criminals in the history books Voss keeps on his shelf. I need to say that clearly. Not as drama, not as self-pity, not as a bid for sympathy, as arithmetic. 2,000 people, give or take, and every single one of them died because I followed a lawful order that I believed in, on a perimeter I still believe is necessary, in defense of a civilization I still believe is worth defending. The kills are legal. My chain of command has confirmed this repeatedly. Fleet Command reviews our engagement logs quarterly, and every review has come back clean. The standing order is valid. The boundary is recognized under interstellar law. The Rethani Consortium itself, before it began to fragment, acknowledged the Terran exclusion zone and agreed to its enforcement terms. Legal, lawful, correct. And somewhere in the corridor behind me, there's a cloud of gas that used to be a man named Korev San, and he told me his name before I killed him, and I cannot make the legality and the name exist in the same sentence without one of them cracking. Voss knows something is wrong with me. He hasn't said anything directly. That's not how Voss operates. Robert Voss is 41 years old, career military, 3rd rotation on a perimeter station, and he manages his crew the way a deep-water fisherman manages weather by watching the instruments and making adjustments before the storm hits. The instrument he's watching now is my sleep cycle. Maddox. I looked up from the maintenance panel I wasn't actually working on. Voss was standing in the hatchway between the operations center and the habitat module, one hand on the frame, the other holding a meal pack he'd already eaten half of. You logged into the weapons console at 0200 last night. Couldn't sleep. Ran diagnostics. You ran diagnostics at 1400 yesterday. Redundancy is doctrine. Redundancy is doctrine when you've got a reason to doubt the system. You've been running double diagnostics for 3 weeks. He took another bite of the meal pack, chewed, watched me. What's the reason? I could have told him. I could have said, the reason is that the diagnostic screen is the only thing in my field of view that doesn't remind me of what's on the other side of the weapons console. I could have said, I run the diagnostics because the diagnostics are numbers, and numbers don't have names. Instead I said, just being thorough. Voss looked at me for another 5 seconds. Then he nodded, once, and left. He didn't push it because Voss never pushes. He observes. He documents. He waits. And when the pattern becomes unmistakable, when the sleep deficit accumulates into tremors, when the maintenance rituals calcify into compulsions, when the silence between crew members hardens into something that can't be broken by normal conversation, he files the rotation request. That's how it works. That's how it worked for Marsh before me, and for the corporal before Marsh, and for every operator who has ever sat behind these weapons and pulled this trigger until the trigger started pulling back. But I didn't want the rotation. Not yet. Because rotating off KBS-7 meant someone else would sit here, and someone else would fire, and the line would hold, and the killing would continue. And my leaving would change nothing except which name was on the engagement logs. And because, and this is the part I'm only now able to say clearly, I was beginning to suspect that the killing was changing. Not me, not my willingness to follow the order. The killing itself, the nature of what we were doing at Kessler Boundary. The ships were getting worse. Not worse as in more dangerous, worse as in less. Less armed, less shielded, less capable. The first refugee ships, 9 months ago, had been repurposed cargo haulers, industrial vessels, with enough structural integrity to at least survive the crossing. What was coming through now was different. Jury-rigged atmospheric shuttles with FTL drives bolted on by someone who understood the theory but not the engineering. Family transports meant for orbital hops, pushed past their design parameters by a factor of 10. In one case, a passenger pod, just a pod, no independent propulsion, towed to the corridor mouth and released on a ballistic trajectory toward the line, its occupants trusting momentum and prayer to carry them across. I destroyed the pod at a range of 6,000 kilometers. The sensor data said it contained between 8 and 12 people. The pod had no weapons, no shields, no engines, no communication capability, and no life support beyond what the passengers had carried aboard in personal equipment. I destroyed it because it crossed the line. Kyle Dunn, who had been awake for that one, stood behind me in the operations center and didn't say a word, but his hand was on the edge of the console, and his knuckles were white. And when I turned around, he was already walking back toward the engineering bay, and the hatch closed behind him with the particular, careful precision of someone who is controlling the speed at which they do everything, because if they stop controlling one thing, they will stop controlling all of them. Dunn is 19 years old. He volunteered for perimeter duty because the recruitment materials described it as low-intensity border monitoring, and the pay differential was enough to clear his father's medical debt in 2 years instead of 6. He is a good engineer. He is a careful, methodical worker. He is also, I have realized over the past several months, exactly the kind of person who should never have been sent here because Kyle Dunn has the specific, inconvenient characteristic of thinking about the people inside the ships. I don't mean empathy in the abstract. I mean that Dunn, when he's on sensor watch, tracks the inbound contacts for the full 12 hours. And somewhere in those 12 hours he starts constructing the narrative. He wonders who they are. He wonders where they came from. He wonders whether they have children, whether they're scared, whether they packed food for the crossing or left in such a hurry that they're hungry right now, right this moment, on the other side of the sensor display, getting closer at 100 kilometers per second to the thing that's going to kill them. I know this because 3 months ago, Dunn asked me a question. Maddox, do you think they know it's going to be fast? We were in the habitat module. I was eating. He was sitting across from me, not eating, turning a meal pack over and over in his hands. The weapons discharge, he said. It's fast, right? There wouldn't be time to... It's instantaneous, I said. Hull breach to plasma conversion is less than a second. He nodded. He kept turning the meal pack. Then he said, good. And then he went to the engineering bay and stayed there for 14 hours. And when he came out, he looked exactly like a person who had been crying in private for a significant portion of that time. And none of us said anything about it because there is nothing to say. That's the station. That's the crew. 4 people in a box with a gun, pointed at a door that people keep trying to come through. We shoot them when they come through. The order says shoot. The law says shoot. The perimeter says shoot. And the ships keep getting worse. And the people inside them keep getting more desperate. And the cloud in the corridor keeps getting thicker. And I am beginning to understand that the question I need to answer is not whether the order is right. The question is whether I can keep being the person who follows it. The engagement that changed everything was not Korev San. He was the crack. The break came 6 days later. I was on the weapons console primary watch. 600 to 1800 standard rotation. Olin was running the sensor grid beside me. Voss was in the operations center reviewing supply requisitions for the next quarterly resupply. Dunn was in the engineering bay, where Dunn always was when he wasn't on watch. Olin picked up the contact at 0814. Standard thermal bloom at the corridor mouth, consistent with a small vessel dropping out of FTL and coasting on residual velocity. Single contact, no escort, no military signature. Got one, Olin said. He said it the way you'd say you'd found a wrench you'd misplaced. Flat, professional. Already half done with the emotional processing because Olin had figured out earlier than any of us that the emotional processing was the part that would kill you. So he'd learned to front-load it, compress it into the 3 seconds between detection and report, and by the time the words left his mouth, whatever Travis Olin felt about what was coming had already been filed somewhere below his operational surface. I pulled up the tracking data. One ship, civilian class. The spectral analysis showed a hull composition consistent with Rethani Light Transport, one of the smaller models, designed for in-system passenger service. No weapons signature, no shield harmonics. The thermal profile was low, which meant the engines were cold, which meant the ship had cut power before entering the corridor and was drifting in on momentum. Standard pattern, standard approach, standard outcome. Bearing 047, range 9.2 million kilometers, Olin read off. Velocity is slow, really slow, 800 meters per second. That was unusual. Most inbound contacts came through at several kilometers per second, fast enough to reach the boundary line before they ran out of whatever nerve or fuel had gotten them this far. 800 meters per second was a crawl. At that speed, the ship would take almost 4 hours to reach the engagement threshold. Engine failure? I asked. Olin shook his head. Engines read cold, not dead. He cut them on purpose. I looked at the tracking display. A single blue dot, barely moving, inching toward the red line that marked the Terran territorial boundary. He's slow-walking it, I said. Looks like. I flagged Voss. He came into the operations center, read the display, and frowned not at the contact but at the velocity. He's going to be in the corridor for hours, Voss said. That's a long time to sit in the engagement queue. Maybe he wants to think about it, I said. Voss looked at me, a measured look, the kind of look that was cataloging my word choice and filing it alongside the sleep data and the diagnostic logs. Maybe, he said. Let me know when he hits the threshold. He went back to his supply requisitions. I sat at the weapons console and watched the blue dot crawl. At 0903, the ship's communications array activated. The broadcast was on an open channel, the same frequency the boundary beacons used. The voice was Rethani, speaking standard, but the accent was different from Korev San's, less clipped, more fluid, the kind of accent that comes from years of conversation practice rather than trade recordings. Terran Border Station. This is an unregistered vessel. I am aware I am approaching your sovereign boundary. I need to ask a question before I proceed. Olin and I looked at each other. In 14 months, no inbound contact had ever asked a question. I opened the response channel before thinking about whether I should. This is Kessler Boundary Station 7. State your question. The pause was long enough that I thought the signal had dropped. Then, are you the one who decides? Say again. When my ship crosses your boundary, are you personally the one who fires the weapon? I should have closed the channel. The standing order doesn't prohibit communication with inbound contacts, but it doesn't encourage it either. And every engagement protocol guide I've ever read recommends against establishing personal rapport with a target. The reasoning is obvious. It's harder to fire at a voice than at a dot. But I didn't close the channel. Yes, I said. Another pause. What is your name? That's not information I'm authorized to share. My name is Thessan Orn. I'm carrying 11 passengers. We left the Ilsthen system 43 days ago. We have been traveling for 43 days in a ship designed for 40-minute orbital transfers. We are out of food. We are nearly out of water. Our atmospheric recycler is failing, and within the next 6 to 8 hours, our CO2 levels will reach toxic concentration. I said nothing. The blue dot continued to crawl. I am telling you this, Thessan Orn continued, because I want you to understand that I am not crossing your boundary as an act of aggression. or trespass or disrespect. I am crossing it because the space behind me has become incompatible with life, and your space is the only direction in which life remains possible. I have no weapons. I have no hostile intent. I have 11 people who would very much like to continue breathing. The standing order applies regardless of intent, I said. The boundary is absolute. You are advised to change course. Change course to where? I didn't answer because there was no answer. The Rethani core systems were in famine. The neutral zones were overwhelmed. The Selvari Dominion had closed its borders 8 months ago. The Corvain had never opened theirs. In the entire navigable volume reachable by a ship with a failing recycler and no food, there was exactly one destination that offered the possibility of survival, and it was on my side of the line. You know there's nowhere, Thessan Orn said. You know it as well as I do. So I'm asking again, not as a demand, not as an argument, but as a factual question. Are you the one who decides? The order decides. I execute. No, Thessan Orn said. That's the answer people give when they don't want to carry the weight. But you and I are the only 2 people in this conversation, and only one of us has a weapon. Are you the one who decides? I turned to Olin. He was watching me with an expression I couldn't read, not judgment, not sympathy, just attention. The focused, unblinking attention of someone who recognizes that the thing happening in front of him is the thing that's been building for months. I closed the channel. Track him, I said. Let me know when he hits the threshold. Olin nodded. He tracked the blue dot. I sat at the weapons console with my hands flat on the targeting interface and waited. At 11:47, the ship reached the engagement threshold, 50,000 kilometers from the boundary line, close enough that our weapons could achieve a clean kill, but far enough that debris dispersal would remain within acceptable parameters. The blue dot pulsed on the display and the system flagged it in red, and the targeting solution resolved automatically, and the firing indicator lit green. And I sat there. The dot kept moving. At 11:49, the ship crossed the boundary line. The firing indicator stayed green. My hand stayed flat on the console. The dot was now inside Terran sovereign space, and the standing order was unambiguous, and I did not fire. Olin said nothing. At 11:51, Voss walked into the operations center, looked at the display, and stopped. Maddox. I see it. The contact is inside the boundary. I see it, Sergeant. Voss stood behind me. I could feel his presence the way you feel a change in air pressure, not through any specific sense, but through the awareness that the geometry of the room had changed and the center of gravity had shifted. Corporal Maddox, the standing order requires... I know what it requires. The silence that followed was the loudest sound I'd heard in 14 months. Louder than the weapons discharge. Louder than the debris expanding into gas. Louder than Korev San saying his name. Voss reached past me and opened the communications channel. His voice was steady, controlled, professional, uninflected. Unregistered vessel. This is Kessler Boundary Station 7. You are inside Terran sovereign territory. You are in violation of the Terran exclusion zone. Under the standing enforcement order, you are subject to immediate lethal engagement. He paused. Corporal, fire the weapon. I looked at the display. The blue dot was 73,000 kilometers inside the line, still crawling at 800 meters per second, and the targeting solution was locked, and the firing indicator was green, and the ship contained 12 people, including Thessan Orn, who had asked me if I was the one who decides. No, I said. In the Terran Defense Perimeter Manual, Section 12.7, there is a paragraph that describes the consequences of refusing a direct order during an active engagement. The language is clinical. Willful refusal to execute a lawful engagement order constitutes dereliction of duty under the Terran Military Code, Section 44, Subsection 3. Such refusal during an active defense situation may additionally constitute breach of the sovereign perimeter, punishable under the Territorial Integrity Act of 2389. The practical consequences are simpler: court-martial, imprisonment, dishonorable discharge, career over, freedom provisional, reputation destroyed. Voss knew all of this. He had served long enough to have seen refusals before, not on perimeter stations, but in other contexts, The slow-motion collapse of a soldier's willingness to do the thing the machine required. He knew the paperwork. He knew the procedure. He knew exactly what was supposed to happen next. What happened next was that Voss sat down, not in the command chair, in the secondary sensor station, the one Olin usually occupied. Olin had moved without anyone noticing. He was standing near the hatch now, neither leaving nor approaching, occupying the specific geometry of someone who wanted to witness without participating. Voss sat in the chair and looked at the display for a long time. The blue dot continued to move. It was now 91,000 kilometers inside the boundary, well past the engagement threshold, deep enough into Terran space that the automated log would record it as a sovereign incursion, regardless of what we did next. "How long?" Voss asked. "How long what?" "How long have you been unable to fire?" The question was precise, not unwilling, unable. There was a difference, and Voss was a man who understood differences. "I don't know," I said. "It might have been building since the beginning." Voss nodded. He rubbed his face with both hands, the first unprofessional gesture I'd ever seen him make, the fatigue breaking through the surface for exactly as long as it took to push it back down. "Olin," he said. "Sergeant, man the weapons console." Olin didn't move for 3 seconds. Then he crossed the operations center, sat down in my chair, the chair I'd just vacated, by turning sideways, not standing, because my legs weren't entirely reliable, and placed his hands on the targeting interface. The display showed the blue dot. The firing indicator was still green. Olin sat there for 11 seconds. I counted them because counting was the only thing I could do that didn't involve thinking about what was happening. Then Olin said, "Sergeant, I am experiencing a malfunction in the primary targeting array. The system is showing a false lock. I'm unable to confirm a valid firing solution." The primary targeting array was not malfunctioning. The system was not showing a false lock. The firing solution was valid. Every piece of equipment on KBS-7 was functioning within normal parameters, and Travis Olin knew that, and Robert Voss knew that, and I knew that, and the automated log would show that every diagnostic run that day had returned clean. Voss looked at Olin. Olin looked back. Neither of them blinked. "Log it," Voss said. "Targeting malfunction, timestamp 1153, engagement delayed pending system diagnostic." "Logged," Olin said. And Thessan Orn's ship, with its 11 passengers and its failing recycler, and its 43 days of terror compressed into a hull designed for 40-minute hops, continued to drift deeper into Terran space at 800 meters per second, while 3 soldiers manufactured a fiction that would buy perhaps 4 hours before anyone noticed. That was the break. Not my refusal, that was personal, private, the crack I'd been carrying since Korev San's name. The break was Olin. The break was Voss not countermanding Olin's lie. The break was the moment when the machine that had been operating perfectly for 14 months stuttered. Not because the parts failed, but because 3 of the 4 parts looked at each other and decided, without speaking, without planning, without any of the things that institutional discipline is supposed to prevent, that today the machine was going to pretend to be broken. Kyle Dunn found out 20 minutes later. He came into the operations center for a routine power allocation check and saw the blue dot on the display deeper now, over 100,000 kilometers past the line, and looked at it, and looked at us, and said nothing for what felt like a full minute. Then he said, "How long until the diagnostic clears?" Olin said, "I'm running a full array sweep, 4 hours minimum." Dunn looked at the display again. "His recycler is failing. If he's not lying about that, his people are going to be unconscious from CO2 in about 5 hours and dead in 7. "I'm aware," Olin said. "So if the diagnostic takes 4 hours and nobody can fire for 4 hours, and in 4 hours they're—" Dunn stopped. He was doing the math. He was doing the math that all of us had already done, the math that said, if the targeting array is conveniently broken for 4 hours, the ship will be deep enough into Terran space that the engagement window will have passed, and the question will no longer be whether to fire, but what to do with 12 Rithani refugees drifting toward the inner system in a dying ship. "I'll go check the power coupling on the array," Dunn said. "Make sure the diagnostic is thorough, really thorough." He went back to the engineering bay. He did not check the power coupling on the array. The power coupling on the array was fine. Instead, he disabled the automated engagement log's real-time uplink to Fleet Command. the system that transmitted our firing data and operational status every 6 hours to the regional command node. He disabled it by physically disconnecting the relay buffer and replacing it with a diagnostic jumper that would make the system appear to be running a deep-level maintenance cycle. When I asked him about it later, he said, the uplink was showing intermittent signal degradation. I pulled it for maintenance. Standard procedure. It was not standard procedure. There is no standard procedure for disconnecting the uplink. The uplink is classified as critical infrastructure. Disconnecting it without authorization is a separate offense from anything I'd done, and Dunn knew that, and Dunn did it anyway, and when I asked him why, his answer was the most honest thing anyone on the station had said in 14 months. Because Maddox is right and the order is wrong, and I'm 19, and I don't know how to make that into a legal argument, but I know how to pull a relay buffer. We let the ship drift for 6 hours. During those 6 hours, a number of things happened that were individually minor and collectively represented the complete dissolution of Kessler Boundary Station 7 as a functional component of the Terran defense perimeter. First, Voss drafted an incident report describing simultaneous targeting array and communications uplink malfunctions, each requiring independent diagnostic and repair operations that could not be conducted concurrently due to shared power allocation constraints. The report was technically accurate in every detail except the fundamental one that the malfunctions were fictitious. It was written in the precise, bloodless language of military infrastructure maintenance, and it was designed to survive exactly one level of review before falling apart under scrutiny. Second, Olin, operating the sensor grid, tracked 2 additional inbound contacts at the corridor mouth. Both were Rethani civilian vessels. Both were approaching the boundary. Olin logged them as detected, monitored, pending engagement capability restoration, and continued tracking without alerting anyone outside the station. Third, Dunn ran the numbers on atmospheric recycling capacity for the station itself and determined that if we brought 12 Rethani aboard, our air supply would last approximately 61 days before CO2 scrubbing capacity was exceeded. Our next scheduled resupply was in 44 days. Fourth, I opened the communications channel and talked to Thessan Orn. I didn't plan to. The channel was still configured from the earlier exchange, and when I sat down at the secondary console away from the weapons interface, because sitting at the weapons interface had become physically difficult in a way I couldn't explain to a medical officer, my hand moved to the transmit key with the automatic precision of someone reaching for a tool they'd used 1,000 times. Thessan Orn, this is Station 7. What is your current atmospheric status? The delay was longer than signal propagation should have required. When his voice came back, it was thinner, more effortful. The CO2 was already doing its work. We're at 3.2% and climbing. 2 of my passengers have lost consciousness. One of the juveniles is having difficulty breathing. A pause. I should tell you I heard your sergeant's order, and I heard your refusal. I want you to know that I am not depending on your mercy. If you fire, I will understand. We're not going to fire. You say that, but you are one person on a station governed by orders you did not write. The next person to sit at your console may not hesitate. There is no next person. There are 4 of us, and we've all made the same decision. Another long pause. When Thessan Orn spoke again, his voice had changed, not softer, not grateful, but something harder to categorize. The sound of someone encountering a fact that didn't fit into the model they'd been operating under. Why? And I didn't have a good answer. Not a doctrinal answer, not a philosophical answer, not even a personal answer that would hold up under any kind of logical pressure. All I had was the truth, which was small and specific and insufficient. Because you told me your name. That's not a reason. I know. Your entire perimeter is built on the principle that names don't matter, that the line is the line, that individual circumstances are irrelevant to enforcement. I know that too. So what changed? I looked at the display. The blue dot. Thessan Orn, 11 passengers, 43 days failing recycler, was now 140,000 kilometers inside Terran space, close enough to the station that we could have visual contact if I pointed a telescope in the right direction. I think, I said, that the perimeter works because no one who enforces it has ever had to look at what they're enforcing it against. It's numbers, sensor data, dots on a screen. The boundary beacons say the line is real, and the ships that cross it become plasma and the plasma disperses, and the line stays clean. I stopped, took a breath. But you don't disperse if I let you talk first. You become a person with a name and 11 passengers, and the line is still real, but the person is also real, and I can't make them both real at the same time. So your perimeter has a vulnerability. Yes. And the vulnerability is conversation. I almost laughed. Almost. The sound that came out was closer to a cough, the kind of involuntary exhalation that happens when something is too true to process as humor and too absurd to process as anything else. The vulnerability, I said, is that the people enforcing the perimeter are people. Thessan Orn was quiet for a long time. In the background of his transmission, I could hear the thin, strained sound of his ship's atmospheric system laboring against its own failure. A rhythmic wheezing, like mechanical breathing, like the ship itself was trying to stay alive. "Corporal," he said, "my ship cannot sustain life much longer. If you are genuinely choosing not to fire, then I need to know what happens next, because crossing your boundary was the plan. I don't have a plan for surviving it." I looked at Voss. He'd been listening. He was standing by the operations center's main display, arms folded, face unreadable. "Sergeant," I said, "what do we do with him?" Voss stared at the display for another 10 seconds. Then he unfolded his arms and said the sentence that ended his career. "Bring them in." The docking procedure was improvised. KBS-7 was not designed to receive civilian vessels. Our docking port was calibrated for Terran military standard, the universal coupling used by supply shuttles and personnel transports. Thessan Orn's ship used a Rethani atmospheric seal that was incompatible with our hardware on 6 different axes. Dunn solved it in 90 minutes. He sealed off the station's secondary airlock, depressurized the staging compartment, spacewalked across 112 meters of vacuum carrying a portable docking collar he'd fabricated from hull repair materials and recycler components, and manually attached it to the Rethani ship's emergency access hatch. The seal wasn't airtight. He told us later that it was leaking atmosphere at a rate that would have been catastrophic over 24 hours, but it held long enough to open the hatch and begin transferring passengers. I was in the airlock when they came through. 12 Rethani, Thessan Orn, and 11 others. I'd seen Rethani before, in briefings and intelligence materials. Bipedal, slightly taller than humans on average, skin that varied from deep gray to pale blue depending on caste and regional origin, with the 4-fingered hands and wide-set eyes that gave their faces an expression humans tended to read as permanent mild surprise. In the briefings, they looked alien, abstract, the kind of faces you could file under other and not think about again. In the airlock, they looked like people who had been dying for 43 days. Thessan Orn came through first. He was tall, taller than me by a head, and thin in the way that starvation produces. Not angular but diminished, as if the substance of him had been consumed from the inside, and what remained was a framework. His skin was the pale blue of a Rethani from the northern provinces, but it had a grayish undertone that I would later learn indicated severe dehydration. His clothes were the remnants of what had probably been professional attire. A tunic of some structured fabric, now torn, stained, and repaired in multiple places with adhesive patches. He looked at me. I looked at him. This was the moment that the voice on the radio became a body in the room, and the body had eyes, and the eyes had an expression that I recognized immediately because I'd been wearing it myself for months. Not fear, not gratitude, just the flat, worn exhaustion of someone who has been making impossible decisions for so long that the machinery for any other kind of thought has rusted shut. "Corporal Maddox," he said, "Thessan Orn. You are younger than your voice suggested. I get that a lot." Behind him, the other passengers were coming through. 2 of them were being carried, the ones who'd lost consciousness from CO2 exposure. 3 more were moving under their own power, but barely, leaning on the walls of the airlock, their breathing harsh and shallow. The 4 juveniles were clustered together, held in a tight group by an older Rethani who had one hand on each of the 2 smallest. The juveniles were small, not infant small, roughly analogous to human children between 4 and 8 years old, if I was reading Rethani developmental markers correctly. They stared at me with the specific, unguarded directness that children of any species seem to share, the total absence of social filtering that allows a child to look at a stranger and simply see them, without narrative, without preconception, without the adult habit of constructing a version of the person that is easier to manage than the real one. I am the person who would have killed them. That thought arrived without warning, without preamble, and with a force that I can only describe as structural, as if something load-bearing in my chest shifted position, and the architecture above it groaned. I am the person who would have killed them, not theoretically, not in a trolley problem abstraction. I am the specific individual person who was sitting at a specific weapons console with a specific firing solution locked, and if I had pressed the specific button, these specific children would be plasma. I turned away from the airlock. I walked to the head of the station's single, cramped sanitation facility, and I closed the hatch and I put my hands on the sink, and I breathed until the breathing felt voluntary again. When I came back, Voss had the situation organized. The 2 unconscious passengers were in the habitat module, being treated with our emergency medical supplies limited designed for human physiology, but Olin was on the medical database finding equivalencies, and Dunn was adjusting the atmospheric mix to be closer to Rethani standard. Thessan Orn was standing in the operations center, looking at the display. Looking at the 2 blue dots at the corridor mouth, the 2 additional ships Olin had detected during the 6-hour drift. "More of us," Thessan Orn said. "Yes. What will you do?" I looked at Voss. Voss looked at the display. The 2 dots were moving faster than Thessan Orn's ship had several kilometers per second, standard approach velocity. At their current speed, they would reach the boundary line in approximately 3 hours. Voss said, "Olin, what's the targeting array status?" "Still down for diagnostic, Sergeant. 4 to 6 hours minimum." There was no targeting array malfunction. There had never been a targeting array malfunction. The fiction was dissolving in real time, becoming less a lie and more a shared decision to stop pretending. "Keep running the diagnostic," Voss said, and that was the second career-ending sentence in as many hours. By the end of the first day, we had 31 Rethani on a station designed for 4. The 2 additional ships had contained 9 and 10 passengers respectively. Like Thessan Orn's vessel, they were civilian transports repurposed for deep space crossing, fragile, underpowered, limping through the corridor on fuel margins that shouldn't have been survivable. Unlike Thessan Orn's vessel, they came through the boundary at speed, no slow approach, no philosophical conversation. They crossed the line and waited to die and did not die, and when we guided them to the station, their passengers came through the airlock with the specific shattered composure of people who had been expecting oblivion and received instead the disorienting continuation of their own existence. Dunn ran the revised atmospheric calculations. With 31 Rethani and 4 humans, the station's life support had 38 days before CO2 scrubbing capacity was exceeded. The next resupply was in 43 days. The math was a 5-day deficit, 5 days of air that wouldn't exist. "Can we extend it?" I asked. "Extend what?" Dunn said. "I can tune the scrubbers for efficiency. I can reduce the atmospheric cycling rate. I can lower the station temperature by 4 degrees to reduce metabolic CO2 output across all occupants. All of that buys maybe 2 days. 3 if everyone sleeps 12 hours a day. So a 3-day deficit. A 3-day deficit with 31 extra people, and no way to get a supply run moved up without explaining why we need one." Dunn paused. "Which we can't explain without admitting what we've done." The communication uplink was still disconnected. Our 6-hour status reports to Fleet Command had been replaced by Dunn's diagnostic jumper, which was transmitting a convincing imitation of a maintenance cycle. Fleet Command would expect the cycle to complete within 72 hours. After that, silence would trigger a welfare check. 72 hours, 3 days before the lie collapsed. Thessan Orn, who had been listening from the hatch of the habitat module, the only space on the station large enough to accommodate more than 6 people, spoke. "You are calculating how long you can hide us." "Yes," I said, "and the answer is not long enough." "No." He entered the operations center. Behind him, through the open hatch, I could see the habitat module transformed sleeping mats improvised from cargo padding, the galley's single food preparation surface running continuously. Rethani passengers crowded into every available surface area, the 4 juveniles curled together on what had been Voss's bunk. "Corporal Maddox, I owe you a debt that my language doesn't have adequate terms for, but I must be honest with you about something." "Go ahead." I am not the only ship that left Ilsthen. I am not one of dozens. I am not one of hundreds. He paused. I am one of thousands. The operations center was quiet. Olin's sensor grid hummed. The atmospheric recycler wheezed. The station's structural frame ticked softly as thermal expansion shifted the metal. Thousands, Voss said. The collapse of the northern provinces displaced 4 million people in the last 60 days. The internal refugee corridors are saturated. The consortium government, what remains of it, has redirected emergency resources to the southern military districts. The northern civilian population has been functionally abandoned. And they're coming here. They're going everywhere. But the corridor to Kessler is the shortest route to any sovereign space with functional infrastructure. Your boundary beacons are a death threat, but behind the death threat is a civilization that has food, air, water, and the ability to sustain life. The beacons are doing exactly what they were designed to do, communicating what's here. Most of my people hear the warning and understand they will die. They come anyway, because the alternative is to stay and die with certainty. I looked at the sensor grid. The corridor was clear at the moment. No new contacts, but the corridor had been clear before, for hours, for days, until it wasn't, until the next blue dot appeared at the mouth and began its slow, inevitable approach. How many? I asked. How many ships are in transit right now, somewhere between Ilsthen and here? I don't know. I can estimate. If even 1% of the displaced population has access to a ship, and even 10% of those ships are pointed at Kessler Corridor. He did the calculation in his head. 400, maybe more. 400 ships. At the average passenger count, we'd been seeing 10 to 20 per vessel. That was 4,000 to 8,000 people, moving toward a line where I was sitting with a weapon designed to turn them into gas. You can't shoot 400 ships, Thessan Orn said, even if you wanted to, even if you could still bring yourself to fire. Your weapon system has a cycling rate, your power plant has a capacity ceiling, and each ship you destroy creates debris that interferes with targeting the next one. At a certain density of inbound traffic, your perimeter becomes physically impossible to enforce. That's not why I stopped, I said. I know, but it is why the people who gave you the order need to hear what you've done, because the order was designed for a world where one ship crosses the line once a month. It was not designed for this. And if they don't change the order, the next station down the line will try to enforce it against 400 ships, and some of those operators will succeed, and the corridor won't be a debris field. It will be a graveyard on a scale that your species will carry in its name for a century. Voss was leaning against the bulkhead, arms crossed, face carrying an expression I'd seen in the photographs of his military history books, the expression of a commander watching the operational situation evolve past the last viable decision point. He's right, Voss said. The uplink has to come back. We have to report. If we report, I said, they arrest us. They arrest us regardless, Maddox. The question is whether we report now, while the information matters, or whether they discover us in 3 days when the maintenance cycle doesn't end. One of those gives the brass time to make a decision before the wave arrives. The other one doesn't. The decision they'll make is to reinforce the perimeter. Maybe not, but that's above our pay grade. Above our pay grade, I repeated. I looked at the display. Empty corridor, 31 Rithani on the station, 4 humans, a weapon I couldn't fire, an order I couldn't follow, a perimeter that was about to drown. Sergeant, I said, everything about this is above our pay grade. We're 4 enlisted soldiers on a mining platform. We're not diplomats. We're not policymakers. We're the ones who are here, Voss said. That's always been the job. The ones who are here deal with what's here. He looked at Dunn. Kyle, bring the uplink back. Dunn looked at Voss for a long moment. Then he went to the engineering bay and reconnected the relay buffer. The uplink came back online at 22:17 station time. Voss sat at the communications console, opened a secure channel to the regional command node, and began to speak. Regional Command, this is Sergeant Robert Voss, Kessler, Boundary Station 7. I am reporting a perimeter breach. I have 31 Rithani civilians aboard this station. The breach was not forced. The breach was permitted. I ordered the weapons stand down. The decision was mine. I am also reporting intelligence regarding an impending mass crossing event at this section of the boundary. He transmitted Thessan Orn's estimates. the displacement numbers, the corridor traffic projection. Then he said, "I am requesting immediate guidance. I am also requesting legal counsel. Be advised that every member of this station's crew participated in the decision to stand down. Any charges arising from this event should be applied to all 4 personnel equally." The response came 47 minutes later, the signal propagation delay to the nearest command node and back. It was not a voice. It was a text transmission. 3 words. Hold for contact. We held. The contact arrived 19 hours later, in the form of a Terran corvette that dropped out of FTL at the edge of the Kessler system and approached the station with weapons armed and targeting sensors active. I watched it come in on the sensor display and felt something I hadn't felt in 14 months of perimeter duty, the specific chest-tightening awareness of being on the wrong end of a weapon. The corvette was the TCS Harlan, a border patrol vessel assigned to the regional command group, and it was pointed at us with the unambiguous directional intent of a ship that had been told where to go and what it might find when it got there. The Harlan's captain was a commander named George Kessler, no relation to the system, a coincidence he was probably very tired of explaining. He established communication with Voss at 1744 station time, and his first transmission was procedural. "Station 7, this is Commander Kessler aboard the TCS Harlan. I am ordered to secure your station and take command of all operations pending investigation. All crew are to stand down from all duty stations. The weapons platform is to be powered to safe mode. Acknowledge." "Acknowledged," Voss said. "Weapons going to safe mode. Crew standing down." A pause. Then, in a different tone, not softer, but shifted, the way a voice shifts when the script runs out and the person starts, "Voss, how many civilians did you say you had on board?" 31, plus 4 station crew. 31 Rathani on a 4-person mining platform. That's correct. Where are you putting them? Everywhere. Another pause. I'm sending a boarding team. I need you and your crew in the operations center when they arrive. And Voss, don't do anything else that's going to make my report longer than it already is. The boarding team was 6 sailors and a lieutenant named William Cade. They came through the main docking port in full tactical gear, as if they were breaching a hostile vessel, and the first thing Cade saw when he cleared the airlock was a Rathani juvenile, one of the smallest ones, maybe 4 years old in equivalent developmental terms, sitting on the deck outside the operations center, eating a Terran meal ration with obvious unfamiliarity, and staring at the armed humans with that same unguarded directness. Cade stopped. The sailors behind him stopped. The juvenile continued eating. "Well," Cade said. He looked at me. "Corporal Maddox?" "That's me." "You're the one who refused the engagement order?" "Yes." Cade looked at the juvenile again. The juvenile had apparently decided that the armed humans were less interesting than the meal ration and had returned his full attention to the problem of extracting the last portion from the packaging. "Okay," Cade said. "Operations Center, now." The debrief was conducted by Commander Kessler himself in the station's operations center, with all 4 of us seated on one side of the central console and Kessler standing on the other. Lieutenant Cade stood by the hatch, recording everything on a personal data device. Kessler was thorough. He went through the engagement log chronologically, every contact, every kill, every deviation from standard protocol. He was particularly interested in the gap between Thessan Orn's initial communication and my refusal to fire, and in the nature of the targeting malfunction that had provided cover for the stand-down. I told the truth. All of it. The counting, the names, the ships getting worse, the children in the airlock, Olin's false malfunction report, Dunn's uplink disconnect, Voss's order to bring them in. All of it, in sequence, without omission or justification. When I was finished, Kessler was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Corporal, do you understand that you have confessed to multiple violations of the Terran military code, any one of which is sufficient for a general court-martial?" "Yes." "And you understand that Sergeant Voss, Specialist Olin, and PFC Dunn have each independently committed offenses that carry equivalent penalties?" "Yes." "And you are aware that the standing enforcement order has been in effect for 8 years, that it has been upheld by every legal challenge brought against it, and that it represents the formally expressed will of the Terran Confederacy as ratified by the civilian government?" "Yes." Kessler looked at the display. The corridor was still empty, but the emptiness felt different now. Not the absence of threat, but the pause before arrival. 400 ships, he said. That's the estimate. Based on a single refugee's projection. Based on the displacement data from the Rethani northern provinces, which is consistent with the intelligence briefs we've been receiving for 6 months. Kessler turned to Voss. Sergeant, in your professional assessment, is the perimeter enforceable against a mass crossing event of that scale? Voss didn't hesitate. No, sir, not at this station, and not at any individual station. The weapons system can engage approximately 1 contact per 90-second cycle. Against 400 inbound vessels arriving over a period of days or weeks, we would destroy some fraction of them. The remainder would cross. The perimeter would be functionally breached regardless of our willingness to fire. So your position is that the stand-down was operationally inevitable. My position is that the stand-down was morally necessary and operationally premature. The weapons can still fire. I chose not to let them. The operational inevitability is a separate fact that supports the same conclusion. Kessler absorbed this. He was a professional, and professionals process uncomfortable truths with the same systematic care they apply to comfortable ones. You could see it happening behind his eyes, the information being sorted, categorized, weighed against the framework he'd brought with him and the framework that was forming in its place. I need to speak with the refugee, he said. Thessan Orn was in the habitat module, sitting against the far bulkhead, surrounded by sleeping passengers. He rose when Kessler entered, and for a moment the two of them simply looked at each other, the Rethani refugee and the Terran commander, separated by species and circumstance and united by the specific, mutual recognition of people who understand that the next few minutes will determine something larger than either of them. I am Commander George Kessler, Terran Navy, Kessler said. I need to understand your situation and the situation of the people following you. I will tell you everything I know, Thessan Orn said. But first, may I ask something? Go ahead. The corporal who refused to fire, what happens to him? That's not your concern. It is, though, because if you punish him, you're sending a signal to every other operator on every other station along your perimeter. You're telling them that mercy is a crime. And when the next 1,000 ships come through, those operators will fire and fire and fire, and your species will spend the rest of its history as the civilization that converted 4 million refugees into gas, because the order said so. Kessler's jaw tightened. I said it's not your concern. And I'm telling you that it is the only concern. Your corporal saw something your order couldn't account for. He saw people. If you destroy him for that, you destroy the thing that separates a defense perimeter from an extermination barrier. The silence after Thessan Orn's statement lasted long enough for Kessler to make a decision. I know it was a decision because I watched his face change, not dramatically, not the kind of transformation that you'd notice if you weren't looking for it, but a shift in the geometry around his eyes, the muscles relaxing from the configuration of authority into something more complicated and more honest. Tell me about Ilsthen, Kessler said, and Thessan Orn told him. Thessan Orn had been a municipal administrator in the city of Vetha, in the northern Rethani province of Ilsthen. His job had been infrastructure water systems, atmospheric processors, the mundane machinery that kept a city of 2 million people alive. He was good at it. Not brilliant, not visionary, just competent in the specific way that keeps sewage flowing downhill and clean water flowing up and the air breathable and the lights on. He told Kessler this in the operations center, sitting in the chair I usually occupied at the weapons console, and the irony of a man I'd nearly killed sitting in the exact seat where I did my killing was not lost on either of us. Vetha was a provincial capital, Thessan Orn said. 2 million people. Industrial base centered on atmospheric processing components. Not a wealthy city, but functional, self-sustaining. The kind of place that works because everyone does their part and the systems are maintained. Past tense, Kessler observed. The agricultural blight reached the northern provinces 18 months ago. It was a fungal mutation. One of the staple grain species developed a pathogen resistance failure, and within a single growing season, 60% of the northern crop yield collapsed. The consortium government responded by redirecting grain reserves from the northern distribution network to the southern military districts. They starved the north to feed the army. They made a strategic decision. The southern districts are where the fleet bases are. The consortium is engaged in 3 separate border disputes with the Selvari and the Corvain. The government decided that maintaining military readiness was more important than maintaining civilian food security in a region that was already in agricultural decline. So the North starved. The North began to starve. The process was not immediate. We had reserves. We had rationing infrastructure. We had the systems I maintained. For 6 months we held. Then the atmospheric processor network began to fail, not from the blight, but from diverted maintenance resources. The consortium pulled technical personnel out of the northern provinces and reassigned them to military infrastructure projects. Our air processors were designed for regular maintenance cycles. Without the personnel, the cycles were missed. Without the cycles, the processors degraded. Without the processors, the air went bad. First the food, then the air, then the water, because the water purification systems share power infrastructure with the atmospheric processors and cannot operate independently. In sequence, over 7 months, every system that kept Vetha alive was stripped for parts to feed a military buildup in a region 500 light-years away. Kessler was recording this. I could see the small data device on the console, its indicator light blinking steadily. When did you decide to leave? I didn't decide. Deciding implies I had options I was choosing between. I had one option: stay and watch my city die, or take whoever I could carry and move toward the only space in navigational range that had air, water, and food, your space. Even knowing the perimeter. Because of the perimeter told us you had something worth defending. The beacon said cross and die, but behind the death threat, the logic was clear. You built a wall because you have something behind it, something that works, something maintained. He paused. I'm an infrastructure specialist, Commander. I can recognize a functioning system from its defenses. Your perimeter told me everything I needed to know about what was on the other side. Kessler leaned back. The perimeter was built to keep people out, and it advertised what it was protecting. Every warning beacon is also an advertisement. We have enough to be worth guarding. For a man watching his city's air turn poisonous, that advertisement is more powerful than any threat you could attach to it. Commander Kessler sat with that for a while. Then he looked at me. Corporal Maddox, you've been listening to this for 6 hours longer than I have. I'd like your tactical assessment of what happens when 400 ships reach this corridor. Tactical assessment. I turned the words over. Sir, there is no tactical assessment. Tactics are for adversaries. These people aren't adversaries. They're drowning. The tactical assessment for a drowning person is pull them out or watch them die. That's not tactics. That's a choice. The standing order. The standing order was written for raiders, for military threats, for ships that cross the line to do harm. It was not written for this, and applying it to this doesn't make it right. It makes it monstrous. That's not your determination to make, Corporal. No, sir, but I already made it. Kessler looked at me for a long time. Then he stood, collected his data device, and walked to the communications console. Harlan Actual, he said. This is Commander Kessler. I need a priority channel to Vice Admiral Hank Morrison at Regional Command. The response was immediate. Priority channel available, Commander. Routing now. Vice Admiral, this is Commander Kessler at Kessler Boundary Station 7. I've completed the preliminary assessment. I'm transmitting the refugee interview and the station crew's debriefs now. Sir, I need to advise that the situation here is not what the initial report suggested. This is not a perimeter breach. This is a humanitarian crisis at the perimeter's doorstep, and the perimeter as currently configured is going to produce an atrocity. The response from Vice Admiral Morrison, when it came through the propagation delay, was measured and dry in the way that career flag officers are dry, the sound of a man who has processed a great deal of uncomfortable information in his career and has long since stopped reacting to it and started managing it. Commander, you're telling me I have 4 soldiers who refused a standing order, 31 alien civilians on a Terran military installation, and an estimated 400 ships in transit. Yes, sir. And you're telling me the standing order is going to produce an atrocity. Sir, the standing order was designed for a different scenario. The scenario has changed. If we attempt to enforce the order against a mass refugee crossing, we will kill thousands of non-combatant civilians, including children, on open sensor records that any species in the Galactic Arm can access. That's not a perimeter defense, sir. That's a massacre, and it will be documented as one. Commander Kessler, I am aware of the optics. With respect, sir, I'm not talking about optics. I'm talking about 4 operators on a platform who looked at refugee children and could not fire. If the best people we have on the perimeter break before the wave arrives, then the order itself is broken. Not because they're weak, because the order asks them to do something that human beings cannot sustainably do. Morrison was quiet for a long time. Hold the station, he said finally. Do not fire on any vessel. Do not permit any civilian vessel to proceed further into Terran space. I am escalating to Confederate command. And the crew, sir? The crew will be dealt with when I have time for crews. Right now I have 400 incoming ships and an interstellar incident that's going to land on my desk in about 72 hours. Morrison out. The channel closed. Kessler turned to us. You heard the Vice Admiral. You're confined to the station. No weapons, no communications except through me. And for what it's worth, off the record and between us, I think you did the right thing. But the right thing and the legal thing are not the same thing, and I can't protect you from the second just because I agree with the first. Voss nodded. Understood, Commander. Kessler left the operations center. I heard his boots on the deck plating moving toward the airlock, back to his Corvette and his own chain of command and the cascade of consequences that our single refusal had set in motion. Dunn was sitting on the deck near the engineering hatch. He'd been there the entire time, listening. Maddox, he said. Yeah? Are we going to prison? Probably. He nodded. Then he said, I'd do it again. I know. I'd do it again every time. I know, Kyle. He went back to the engineering bay to check the atmospheric scrubbers. The station creaked around us, 35 people breathing the same air, the recyclers laboring at 150% capacity, the life support curve trending toward a wall that was 38 days away and closing. The first wave hit 2 days later, not 400 ships, not yet. The first wave was 17 vessels, a loose convoy that had formed organically in transit, ships of different sizes and capabilities gravitating toward each other in the corridor, the way debris collects along a current. They came through the corridor mouth in a staggered line, separated by intervals of 20 to 40 minutes, each one broadcasting identification and passenger counts on the open channel that Thessan Orn had established during his approach. 17 ships, 206 passengers. Commander Kessler's Corvette was still at the station. He'd received authorization from Vice Admiral Morrison to hold position pending the escalation to Confederate command, which meant he was functionally the senior officer in the system, which meant the 206 Rethani refugees approaching the boundary were his problem. I was in the operations center when the first ship crossed the line. The weapons platform was in safe mode. The firing indicator was dark. The ship crossed the boundary at 0711 station time, and nothing happened, and the absence of the thing that had happened 109 times before was so loud that I felt my hands shake. Olin was tracking the convoy. 17 confirmed. Passenger estimates range from 6 to 22 per vessel. Total count approximately 206, but that's based on self-reporting and I don't have visual confirmation. Kessler was on the communications console, relaying real-time updates to Morrison's command node. His voice was steady, but I could see the tension in his posture. The particular stiffness of a man who is narrating events he has no authority to control. Regional Command, this is Kessler. 17 vessels now inside the boundary. All civilian. No weapon signatures. Passenger count approximately 206. I have no facilities to receive these people. Station 7 is already over capacity. I need a humanitarian response force dispatched to Kessler system immediately. Morrison's response came back through the delay. Commander, Confederate Command is still deliberating. You are authorized to provide emergency life support assistance only. Do not attempt to process, intern, or relocate the refugees. Do not establish any facility that could be interpreted as a permanent installation. Sir, I have 200 people in 17 ships with failing life support. Do not establish permanent facilities is not a meaningful instruction when the alternative is letting them die in the corridor. That is the instruction, Commander. Hold position. Confederate command will advise. Kessler closed the channel and turned to Voss. Sergeant, how many people can this station sustain? Voss looked at Dunn, who had been running the numbers continuously for 2 days. With water recycling at maximum and food rationing at minimum, Dunn said, we can support approximately 60 people for 36 days. After that, CO2 exceeds survivable limits and the water recycler hits mineral saturation. I have 206 people. Yes, sir. So the station can absorb about 25 more. The rest stay in their ships. Their ships are dying, Thessan Orn said. He had entered the operations center without invitation, which was a violation of confinement protocol, which nobody cared about anymore. Most of these vessels have been in transit for 30 to 50 days. Their systems are failing. If you leave them in their ships, you have not saved them. You have given them a different place to die. Kessler looked at Thessan Orn, then he looked at me. Then he looked at the display, where 17 blue dots were slowly distributing themselves inside Terran space, drifting without destination, waiting for something: guidance, rescue, a signal that the killing was truly over, and the next thing had begun. Maddox, Kessler said. Sir. You broke the perimeter. You let these people in. I'm told you had a reason. I did. Then help me with the reason's consequences. I need a plan for keeping 237 people alive on a platform designed for 4. It was the strangest order I'd ever received, not because of its content. Keeping people alive was, in its mechanical specifics, the inverse of what I'd been doing for 14 months, and there was a symmetry to that reversal that felt almost structural, as if the universe had a sense of balance and this was it asserting itself. The strangeness was in the assumption behind the order, that I, the person who had been killing Rethani for over a year, was now the person responsible for keeping them alive. That the same hands, the same mind, the same decision-making architecture that had destroyed 109 ships was now being aimed at the opposite task. I stood up. Done. I need a full inventory of every consumable on this station. Olin, get me atmospheric composition data from every ship in the convoy. Thessan Orn. I looked at him. I need you to organize your people. Identify anyone with engineering, medical, or infrastructure expertise. We're going to need every skill set available. Thessan Orn stared at me for a moment. Then, for the first time since I'd met him, he did something I didn't expect. He laughed. It was not a happy laugh. It was the sound a person makes when the absurdity of their situation exceeds the capacity of any other response, the involuntary exhalation of a man who has spent 43 days fleeing death, arrived at the doorstep of the people who were supposed to deliver it, and is now being asked to help his executioner keep him alive. Infrastructure expertise, he said. Yes, I have some of that. The next 3 days were the most physically demanding of my life, and I had trained for combat. The plan, if you could call it a plan, was to create a distributed life support network by linking the 17 refugee ships to the station's power and atmospheric systems. Dunn designed the coupling architecture. Thessan Orn organized the labor crews. Olin coordinated the resource allocation. Voss managed the logistics. Kessler provided the authority. And I did the work. Spacewalks. 16 of them in 3 days. Carrying cables, coupling assemblies, atmospheric transfer hoses improvised from station supplies, refugee ship components, and creative applications of hull repair materials. Each walk was 90 minutes to 2 hours. Each one was dangerous in ways that the training manuals don't adequately convey: the specific personal danger of floating between fragile ships in hard vacuum, manipulating equipment in pressure gloves that reduce your manual dexterity to about 40%, knowing that a single puncture or seal failure means death by exposure in approximately 90 seconds. I didn't think about the danger. The danger was a relief. The danger was physical, mechanical, solvable, a problem that could be addressed with tools and training and effort. After 14 months of the other kind of danger, the moral danger, the danger of becoming someone who kills without hesitation and sleeps without dreaming a problem that could kill my body instead of my conscience, was almost welcome. By the end of the 3rd day, 11 of the 17 ships were connected to the station's power grid and atmospheric cycling system. The remaining 6 had systems too degraded to interface, and their passengers, 43 people, were brought aboard the station, and the more functional ships, compressing an already impossible population density into something that felt like a violations of physics. Dunn's revised calculations, 60 days of life support at current population levels, assuming no additional arrivals. The second wave arrived on day 5, 42 ships, 519 passengers. They came through the corridor in a continuous stream over 8 hours, one ship every 11 minutes on average, each one crossing the boundary and joining the growing cluster of vessels around KBS-7. Olin tracked them. I guided them into formation positions using the station's navigational beacon. Dunn calculated the life support implications and stopped when the numbers became meaningless. Kessler was on the communications console continuously. Morrison's responses were becoming shorter, terser, the compression of a man who was being squeezed between the situation he was being told about and the response he was authorized to provide. Regional Command, I now have 59 vessels and 756 Rithani civilians in the Kessler system. I need a response force. I need supply ships. I need a decision from Confederate Command. Morrison. Command is deliberating. Sir, I need more than deliberation. I need ships with food and water and medical supplies. Commander, you are aware that any humanitarian operation in this sector requires a policy determination regarding the enforcement status of the boundary. I am aware, sir, and I am telling you that the policy determination is already made. The boundary is not being enforced. It hasn't been enforced for 5 days. Every ship in this system is proof that the standing order is dead. The only question is whether we admit it in time to save the people who are already here, or whether we let them die while we pretend the order still exists. Morrison was quiet for 37 seconds. I counted. Counting was still the only thing I could do that didn't involve thinking about what was happening. A supply convoy is being dispatched, Morrison said. ETA 9 days. Additionally, I am informed that Vice Admiral Morrison is personally transiting to Kessler. I will arrive in 6 days. You're coming yourself, sir? I want to see it, Commander. I want to see what 756 people in a mining station look like, because I'm about to brief the Confederate Senate on this situation, and I don't want to brief them from a data summary. Understood, sir. The channel closed. Kessler turned to us. 6 days until the Vice Admiral, 9 days until supplies, and I have 756 people who need food now. 767, Olin corrected. 11 people on ship 14 are reporting a passenger the original count missed, an infant, born in transit. Kessler closed his eyes for 3 seconds. When he opened them, he looked at me. Maddox, what's the food situation? Station rations are gone. We distributed the last of them yesterday. We're now operating on emergency reserves concentrated nutrient bars designed for human physiology. They're not ideal for Rithani metabolism, but they're calories. How long? At 767 people, 4 days. 6 days until Morrison, 9 until supplies, 4 days of food. The gap was 2 days. 2 days in which 767 people would have air and water, but nothing to eat. Thessan Orn, who had been listening, spoke. 2 days without food is survivable. We are Rithani. Famine is not a new experience for us. It's not acceptable, I said. It's not ideal, but it is the distance between where we are and where help is. 2 days. We have endured 43. 2 more is... He paused, searching for the standard word. Manageable. I looked at him, at his diminished frame, his dehydrated skin, the careful economy of his movements that indicated a body operating on reserves that were already exhausted, and I thought about what it meant that this man, this infrastructure specialist from a city of 2 million, this person who had designed water systems and maintained atmospheric processors and kept the lights on for a population that never noticed because the lights being on was the definition of normalcy, had traveled 43 days through hostile space to reach a place where his executioner now stood beside him, trying to keep him fed. We'll figure it out, I said. I'll figure it out. I didn't know how, but the distance between saying it and doing it was shorter than the distance between not saying it and living with the silence, and right now, the silence was the thing I couldn't afford. Vice Admiral Hank Morrison arrived in the Kessler system 6 days later aboard the cruiser TCS Resolute, accompanied by 3 supply transports and a medical frigate. By that time, the population of the Kessler cluster, the name that had organically emerged for the collection of ships, station, and improvised infrastructure surrounding KBS-7, had grown to 1,104. The third wave had arrived on day 831 more ships, 312 more passengers. The fourth, smaller wave had come on day 1114 ships, carrying only 35 people between them. The ships themselves barely functional, their passengers representing the tail end of a migration that had consumed itself in transit. Dunn had performed a miracle of engineering. With Thessan Orn's infrastructure team's 47 Rithani with engineering, construction, or maintenance backgrounds, he had expanded the station's atmospheric processing capacity by 300%, using components cannibalized from the most damaged refugee ships. He'd built water recycling units from atmospheric condenser parts. He'd rigged a secondary power grid using the refugee ship's remaining fuel cells in series. The cluster looked, from the outside, like a technological tumor, a messy organic growth of ships, cables, hoses, and improvised structures clinging to the original station like barnacles on a pier. It was ugly. It was fragile. And it was keeping 1,100 people alive. Morrison's convoy arrived at 0600 station time. The supply transports began distributing food, water, and medical supplies within 2 hours. The medical frigate dispatched teams to every ship in the cluster, beginning triage on a population that had been without adequate health care for weeks to months. Morrison himself boarded the station at 0900. I had seen vice admirals before in training videos, in fleet documentation, in the distant formal imagery of high command that the military uses to remind enlisted personnel of the chain above them. I had not seen one in person. Morrison was 58 years old, average height, with the kind of physical presence that comes not from size, but from the absolute certainty of a man who has occupied command authority for so long that the authority has become structural part of his posture, his voice, the way he took in a room and its contents with a single comprehensive sweep. He entered the operations center. He looked at the display, the cluster, the ships, the population figures. He looked at the habitat module through the open hatch. Rithani passengers in every available space. The 4 juveniles from Thessan Orn's original ship playing a quiet game in the corner, using pebble-sized components they'd collected from maintenance debris. He looked at me, and at Voss, and at Olin, and at Dunn. Then he looked at Thessan Orn. "You're the first one," Morrison said. "I'm the first one who survived," Thessan Orn said. Morrison absorbed that. "I understand you were an infrastructure specialist." "I am an infrastructure specialist. The tense hasn't changed." "The infrastructure you're specializing in now appears to be keeping 1,000 people alive on a platform designed for 4. 1,104. And it wasn't designed, it was improvised. Your PFC Dunn is the designer. I provided the labor organization." Morrison looked at Dunn. Dunn was standing near the engineering hatch, still holding a diagnostic tool he'd been using when the Vice Admiral came aboard, looking exactly like a 19-year-old PFC who had not slept in 3 days and was suddenly in the presence of the second highest ranking officer in the regional command structure. "PFC Dunn," Morrison said. "Sir, you disconnected the station's communications uplink to conceal the presence of alien refugees on a Terran military installation." "Yes, sir." "And you then spent the subsequent 11 days building a life support system capable of sustaining over 1,000 people using salvaged components and improvised engineering." "Yes, sir." "Those are 2 very different skill sets." "They're the same skill set, sir. Knowing what to disconnect and knowing what to connect. The order of operations just changes." Morrison looked at Dunn for another 5 seconds. Then he turned to Voss. "Sergeant Voss, walk me through the cluster. I want to see every ship, every connection, every person." "Aye, sir." The tour took 4 hours. Morrison walked every meter of the cluster through the station, through the connected ships, through the improvised corridors that Dunn's teams had constructed between vessels using hull plating and emergency sealant. He saw the water recycling units, the atmospheric processors, the distributed power grid. He saw the medical cases: malnutrition, dehydration, respiratory damage from failing atmospheric systems, the accumulated physical toll of weeks in failing ships. He saw the children. There were 38 juveniles in the cluster. 38 children, ranging from the newborn infant on Ship 14 to adolescents in their equivalent of mid-teens. They were in every part of the cluster, integrated into the daily operations because Thessan Orn had organized the population into functional work groups, and the children had naturally attached themselves to the adults in their vicinity. Morrison stopped in one of the connected ships, a converted cargo hauler, its hold now serving as a communal living space for 60 people. In one corner, a group of 7 Rethani juveniles had organized a small activity space using cargo netting and hull scraps. They were, as near as I could tell, building a structure of interconnected components that didn't have an obvious purpose, but was being constructed with the serious, absorbed concentration that children apply to projects they consider important. "What is that?" Morrison asked. Thessan Orn, who was guiding the tour alongside Voss, looked at the structure. "They are building a model of Vetha," he said. "The city we left. They are trying to remember it before they forget." Morrison stood there for a while. His face didn't change. The flag officer's mask stayed in place, the composure maintained. But his hands, which had been clasped behind his back in the standard command posture, shifted. The right hand moved to his side. The left hand followed. Both hands hung at his sides, empty, and for the first time since he'd arrived, Vice Admiral Hank Morrison looked like a man instead of a rank. "How many more?" he asked. "Ships," Thessan Orn said. "People. How many more are coming?" "I don't know with certainty. The displacement from the northern provinces continues. The consortium's internal situation is deteriorating. If the current trajectory holds—" He paused. "Tens of thousands, perhaps more." Morrison turned to Kessler. "Commander, how many stations on this section of the perimeter?" 12, sir. KBS-1 through KBS-12. They form a continuous coverage arc across the corridor approach. "And if the other 11 stations are still enforcing the standing order?" The question hung in the air. Kessler didn't answer, because the answer was obvious. If the other 11 stations were firing, then the corridor on either side of our sector was a kill zone, and ships were dying right now at stations crewed by operators who hadn't had a Thessan Orn, who hadn't heard a name, who were still behind the weapons console doing what the order said. "Morrison to Resolute," the Vice Admiral said. "Connect me to all perimeter stations on this corridor. KBS-1 through KBS-12, priority channel." The connections took 4 minutes. 12 stations, 12 crews, 48 people distributed across 1 billion kilometers of border. "All stations, this is Vice Admiral Morrison. Effective immediately, the standing enforcement order for this corridor is suspended. All weapons are to be placed in safe mode. All inbound civilian vessels are to be permitted to cross the boundary. Repeat, all weapons safe, all civilian traffic permitted. This is a temporary suspension pending policy review by Confederate Command. Any station commander with questions can direct them to me personally. Morrison out." He closed the channel. 12 stations, 12 weapon systems, 12 crews who had been doing what I'd been doing, killing what I'd been killing, carrying what I'd been carrying. Voss was standing behind me. He put his hand on my shoulder, the first time in 14 months that anyone on the station had touched anyone else for any reason other than medical necessity. His grip was firm, brief, the kind of contact that doesn't pretend to fix anything but acknowledges that the thing being carried is real. "Breathe, Maddox," he said. I breathed. Morrison transmitted his report to Confederate Command the following day. It included the engagement logs, the refugee interviews, the cluster documentation, and, critically, his own recommendation. I didn't see the report, but Kessler, who helped draft it, told me the substance. The standing enforcement order should be formally revoked for the Kessler corridor and replaced with a humanitarian processing protocol. The perimeter should be maintained as a surveillance boundary, not a kill boundary. And the 4-person crews operating the stations should be replaced by larger mixed units with medical, diplomatic, and humanitarian capabilities. Confederate Command received the report. The Senate Committee on Territorial Defense was briefed 48 hours later. The committee hearing was broadcast on Open Channel's standard procedure for non-classified defense matters, accessible to any system with a Terran data uplink. Olin pulled it up on the Operations Center display, and we watched it alongside 37 Rethani who had crowded into the room to see the people who would decide whether their survival would be formalized or revoked. The committee chairman was Senator Michael Aldridge, a career politician from the inner systems who had, by the inflexible mathematics of committee assignment rotation, ended up overseeing the defense portfolio during what was about to become its most visible crisis in a decade. He opened the hearing with a summary of the situation and then called Vice Admiral Morrison to testify. Morrison's testimony was clinical, comprehensive, and devastating. He walked through the statistics, the displacement figures, the refugee counts, the engagement logs from KBS-7 and the other corridor stations. He showed the cluster. He showed the ships. He showed the children building a model of Vetha out of hull scraps. Then he showed my engagement log. 109 kills, 2,000 estimated dead, 14 months. Vice Admiral, Senator Aldridge said, "Are you telling this committee that a single corporal on a 4-person station has killed 2,000 people?" "I'm telling this committee that a single corporal on a 4-person station was ordered to kill 2,000 people and did so, lawfully, correctly, in full compliance with the standing enforcement order that this body authorized 8 years ago. And you're suggesting the order is no longer appropriate." "Senator, I am suggesting that the order was designed for a strategic threat environment that no longer exists. The ships crossing the boundary are not raiders. They are not military assets. They are refugee vessels carrying starving civilians, and the standing order makes no distinction between a warship and a dying family. That is not a feature of the order. It is a flaw." "The order was written without distinction intentionally, Vice Admiral. The effectiveness of the perimeter depends on absolute enforcement. If we create exceptions..." "Senator, the exceptions have already been created by a 23-year-old corporal who looked at the people he was ordered to kill and refused. And the 1,100 people he saved by refusing are currently breathing because a PFC who is 19 years old and enlisted to pay off his father's medical debt built a life support system out of salvaged parts. The perimeter is broken. The question is not whether to fix it. The question is what to replace it with." Senator Aldridge was quiet. The committee room was quiet. On the operations center display, I could see the faces of the other senators, some attentive, some uncomfortable, some doing the particular political calculation of men who can see the trajectory of an issue and are positioning themselves relative to it. "Vice Admiral, you mentioned that the corporal refused a direct engagement order." "He did." "And the station commander fabricated a malfunction report to conceal the refusal." "He did." "And the communications specialist corroborated the fabrication." "He did." "And the power systems operator disconnected the data uplink." "He did." "So you're asking this committee to revisit a standing order based on the actions of 4 soldiers who violated military law?" Morrison leaned forward. "Senator, I am asking this committee to look at what those 4 soldiers saw. They saw the ships getting smaller. They saw the passengers getting thinner. They saw children in the airlock. And they did what human beings do when the order and the conscience cannot coexist. They chose the conscience. You can court-martial them for that. You have the legal authority. But you will be telling every soldier on the perimeter that mercy is a crime. And you will be telling every species in the Galactic Arm that the Terran Confederacy responds to starvation with execution. And that is a message, Senator, that we will never be able to unsend." The hearing continued for 6 more hours. Witnesses were called logistics experts, diplomatic advisors, military analysts. But the moment that changed the committee's trajectory, the moment I watched from the operations center, standing beside Thessan Orn, surrounded by refugees who were watching the people who held their lives in legislative session, was when Senator Aldridge asked a question that wasn't in any briefing document. "Vice Admiral, you said the corporal refused because the refugee told him his name." "That's correct, Senator." "What was the name?" "The refugee's name was Thessan Orn." "And before Thessan Orn, before the corporal refused, how many names did the corporal hear?" Morrison paused. 1. A pilot named Korev San, ship number 38. "And the corporal destroyed that ship?" "Yes." "So the first name was not enough?" "No, Senator. The first name cracked the armor. The second name broke it." Senator Aldridge looked at the data on his console. 109 ships. 2,000 dead. 1 name not enough. 2 names sufficient. "How many names?" Aldridge said very quietly. would it take to break every operator on the perimeter? No one answered. No one needed to. The committee voted that evening. The standing enforcement order was suspended pending full legislative review. A humanitarian corridor was authorized through the Kessler sector. Emergency relief operations were approved. 4 soldiers on a mining platform were not court-martialed. Over the next 90 days, 17,000 Rithani refugees crossed the Kessler boundary. The number is important because it has a weight that the political abstraction doesn't carry. 17,000 individual people, each one arriving in a ship that shouldn't have survived the crossing, each one carrying whatever they'd been able to take from homes that were no longer habitable. 17,000 sets of hands, eyes, lungs, 17,000 names. I didn't learn all of them, but I tried to learn some. The humanitarian corridor transformed the Kessler system from a dead-end mining remnant into the largest refugee processing operation in Terran history. Within 3 weeks of the Senate vote, the system contained a field hospital ship, 4 supply transports on continuous rotation, a communications relay station, and a newly constructed orbital platform prefabricated, assembled in 8 days by a Terran engineering corps unit that arrived with the air of people who had been told to build something impossible and had responded by doing it. The new platform was called Kessler Station. No number, no military designation, just the name. It could support 5,000 people and process 200 arrivals per day. It was, in every functional respect, the thing that my 4-person mining platform had been trying to be with hull scraps and emergency sealant. Dunn cried when he saw it. He stood at the viewport of KBS-7, still our home, still operational, now dwarfed by the infrastructure that had grown around it. And he watched the engineering crews assembling the platform, and he cried, and he didn't try to hide it, and none of us said anything about it. "It's what we built," he said. "It's just bigger." He was right. The architecture was different, the scale was different, the resources were different. But the design philosophy linked the ships, share the air, distribute the power, keep them alive, was Dunn's. He'd invented it out of desperation and salvage, and the engineering corps had recognized it and scaled it, and somewhere in the formal documentation of Kessler Station's design specifications, there is a footnote crediting the atmospheric distribution architecture to Field Innovation by PFC Kyle Dunn, KBS-7. Dunn doesn't know about the footnote. I've never told him. He doesn't need credit. He needs what he's always needed, the knowledge that the thing he built works, and the people inside it are breathing. Thessan Orn became the de facto liaison between the Rithani refugee population and the Terran administration. This was not a title anyone gave him. It was a function that accrued to him naturally because he was the person both sides trusted, the Rithani, because he was one of them, and had survived the crossing. The Terrans because he had spent the worst days of the crisis working alongside us and had demonstrated the specific, unremarkable competence that military people recognize and respect, regardless of species. He and I developed a working relationship that was not friendship. The word felt insufficient and inaccurate, but something more precise. We were the 2 people who had been on opposite sides of a weapons system at the moment the system failed. And the fact that we were both still alive had created a bond that didn't have a name in either of our languages. We talked, when the operational tempo allowed it, not about policy or logistics, but about the things that policy and logistics are made of, the substrate of individual experience that gets compressed into numbers and reports and committee testimony. Your Senator Aldridge asked how many names it would take to break every operator on the perimeter, Thessan Orn said one evening. We were on the observation deck of the new platform, looking out at the cluster of refugee ships that still surrounded KBS-7 like a constellation. He did. The answer is one. One. One name, heard at the right moment by the right person. That's all it takes. The system doesn't fail because of a flaw in the system. It fails because the system is operated by beings who are capable of hearing names. Every defense you build, every order you write, every perimeter you establish, it all depends on the operator being able to treat the target as an abstraction. And every abstraction has a threshold. One name at the right moment and the abstraction collapses, and what's behind it is a person, and you cannot shoot a person the way you can shoot a dot. Then every perimeter is temporary. Every perimeter that depends on killing is temporary, because the killing is done by people, and people accumulate the weight of what they've done, and the weight eventually exceeds the order's authority. I thought about that. I thought about the 109 ships, The 2,000 dead. The weight. I think about Korev-san, I said. The one you killed. The one who said his name and I killed anyway. He was the first name. He wasn't enough. He was enough. You just didn't break immediately. The fracture took time. But it started with him. That doesn't help him. No, it doesn't. It helps the ones who came after. Which is a truth you're going to have to learn to carry without it ever being adequate. Because it isn't adequate. The math doesn't balance. 2,000 dead and 1,100 alive is not a ratio that resolves into peace. It's a weight that distributes differently over time but never gets lighter. I looked at the cluster, at the ships, at the lights, some Rithani, some Terran, blinking in patterns that were becoming synchronized as the systems were integrated. How do you carry it? I asked. Thessan Orn considered the question with the care of a man who had thought about it every day for 2 months and had not arrived at a satisfactory answer. I carry it by being useful, he said. Every system I maintain, every person I help process through the station, every problem I solve it, doesn't reduce the weight, but it puts the weight to work. The dead cannot be repaid, but the living can be served, and the serving is... He paused. It is not redemption. It is not healing. It is just the thing I do with the hours that remain. I was going to kill you. Yes. I had the targeting solution locked. The firing indicator was green. I was going to press the button. Yes. And you were on the other side with 11 people and 4 children and a failing recycler, and you asked me if I was the one who decides. Yes. Why did you ask? Thessan Orn looked at me. His wide-set eyes, which I'd spent 14 months seeing only in sensor profiles and intelligence reports, had an expression that I can only describe as the opposite of the one I'd expected. Not accusation, not absolution. Just the level, steady attention of someone who has decided that seeing clearly is the only thing worth doing and has made the seeing into a practice. Because I wanted you to know, he said, not the order, not the perimeter, not the doctrine. You. I wanted you to know that it was you. Not a machine, not a protocol. You, personally, holding the weapon, making the choice. Because a machine cannot be reached, a protocol cannot hear a name. But a person... He paused. A person can be asked a question that changes what they're able to do. And if I'd fired anyway? Then you would have been a person who fired after hearing the question, and you would have carried that too. Differently than you carry this. But you would have carried it. We were quiet for a while. The cluster turned slowly in the viewport, its lights blinking, its improvised connections visible as dark lines between the ships, an ugly, beautiful, improbable structure built by people who were supposed to be dead, maintained by people who were supposed to have killed them. Thessan, I said. I'm sorry. For what? For the 109. For the 2,000. For the 14 months when I was the dot on their screen, and they were the dot on mine, and I chose the order over the name every single time. The apology is not owed to me, it's owed to them. I know, and they can't hear it. No, they can't. He stood. He looked out at the cluster one more time. But the ones who come next can, and the ones who come next are arriving tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. And you will be here, and you will not fire. And every day you don't fire is not an erasure of the days you did, but it is something, and something, Corporal Maddox, is what we build with. In all of this, I haven't talked enough about Robert Voss. Voss was the first to act. Not to refuse, that was me. Not to fabricate, that was Olin. Not to disconnect, that was done. Voss was the first to decide. The decision happened in the silence between my refusal and his next order, in the seconds when he could have relieved me, taken the weapons console himself, and fired. He had the authority, he had the training, he had the legal obligation, and he sat down in the secondary chair and he let it happen. I asked him about it once, 3 weeks into the humanitarian operation, when the intensity had decreased enough to allow conversation about something other than immediate survival. Sergeant, why didn't you relieve me? Voss was cleaning the station's water recycler intake, a task so menial it was technically Dunn's job. But Voss did it anyway because Voss understood that in a 4-person crew, the sergeant who asks others to do work he won't do himself loses something that rank can't replace. He didn't look up from the recycler. Because you were right. You didn't know I was right. In that moment, all you knew was that I was refusing a lawful order. I knew more than that, Maddox. I'd been watching you for months. I watched the sleep get shorter. I watched the maintenance rituals get longer. I watched you stop eating dinner at the same time as the rest of us because the galley is where we talk. And talking was becoming difficult for you. I knew what was happening because I'd seen it happen to Marsh, and to the operator before Marsh, and to one other operator on a different station during my first rotation, a man named Tyler Brandt, who put his sidearm against his own helmet during a spacewalk, and didn't pull the trigger only because the safety was engaged, and the 3 seconds it took him to disengage it were enough for his hands to start shaking. Voss looked up. The order breaks people, Maddox. It's designed to be followed by machines, and it's given to humans, and the humans break. Marsh broke quietly. Brandt almost broke permanently. You broke loudly in the middle of an engagement on an open channel with a witness. And when you broke, I had a choice: put you back together and make you fire, or let the break stand and deal with what came next. And you chose what came next. I chose what came next because what came before was unsustainable. Not for you, for all of us. Olin was 3 months behind you. Dunn was 6 months behind Olin. I was... He paused. The pause was the most uncharacteristic thing I'd ever seen him do, because Voss was a man who did not pause, who processed information and delivered decisions in a continuous, unbroken stream. I was already broken, Voss said. I broke during my first rotation. A ship came through carrying a school group adolescents on some kind of educational trip that got caught in the wrong corridor. 22 passengers, all young. I fired, I logged the engagement, I signed the after-action report, and I went to the head and I stood there and I broke, and I put myself back together, and I came out and I continued to operate, and I have been continuing to operate on the repaired version of myself for 3 years. You never said anything. What would I have said? I disagree with the order, but I follow it anyway. That's not courage. It's not wisdom. It's the specific cowardice of a man who knows better and does it anyway, because the alternative is harder. You forced the alternative, Maddox. You forced me into the hard thing, and I am... Another pause. I am grateful. Which is a word I never expected to use about a subordinate who violated a direct order during an active engagement. He went back to cleaning the recycler. I stood there for a while, in the narrow space between the engineering bay and the galley, and I tried to reconcile the Voss I'd known for 14 months. The steady, unflappable, procedurally meticulous sergeant who ran the station like a clock, with the man who had just told me he'd been carrying a broken interior for 3 years while maintaining a perfect exterior. Sergeant? Yeah. The operator on your first rotation, Tyler Brandt. What happened to him? Medical rotation, psychiatric treatment, returned to service in a different posting. He's a logistics coordinator on one of the inner system stations now. Good at it. Steady. Do you talk to him? We message, not often. When one of us needs to talk to someone who knows what the perimeter is. Is that a common thing? Perimeter operators staying in contact? Voss looked at me again. There's a network, unofficial. 40, 50 people spread across the fleet. All former perimeter operators. We don't talk about what we did, not the specifics, not the numbers. We just check in, make sure everyone's still here. Still here. Still here. Not in the way Tyler Brandt almost wasn't still here, just still here, present, functioning, able to carry the day. I filed that. I filed it alongside the engagement log and the names and the cloud of gas in the corridor and the children building a model of Vetha and everything else that the Kessler boundary had put inside me. The weight that Thessan Orn said would never get lighter, and the work that he said could be built with it. Sergeant, when this is over, when the review is complete and the corridor is formalized and whatever happens to us legally has happened, I want to be part of that network. You already are, Voss said. You were part of it the moment you refused to fire. The legislative review of the Standing Enforcement Order took 4 months. During those 4 months, 31,000 Rithani refugees crossed the Kessler boundary. They were processed through Kessler Station, provided with basic necessities, and gradually resettled in designated areas on 3 frontier worlds that the Confederate Senate had allocated for emergency refugee hosting. The political debate was brutal. I followed it from the station, still operational, still crewed by the original 4 of us. Our status technically administrative hold pending investigation, but functionally nobody wants to deal with the paperwork, so keep doing what you're doing. The debate centered on 2 positions. The first, championed by Senator Aldridge and a coalition of inter-system representatives, argued that the Standing Enforcement Order should be permanently revoked and replaced with a humanitarian corridor protocol, a system that maintained the sovereignty of the boundary while providing legal mechanisms for refugee processing. The second, advanced by Senator Charles Breckinridge and the Defense Hawks, argued that any weakening of the perimeter constituted an invitation to future incursion, and that the refugee crisis, however genuine, could not be allowed to compromise the defensive architecture that had kept Terran space safe for 8 years. Breckinridge was not a bad man. I want to be clear about that, because the easy version of this story makes him the villain, and the easy version is wrong. He was a senator from a frontier world, Kalis III, one of the colonies that had been raided during the Third Incursion War. His constituency had buried 1,100 people after a Selvari strike on a civilian processing center. He had stood at those funerals, he had looked at the survivors, and he had dedicated his political career to ensuring that the perimeter held, because the perimeter was the thing between his people and the raiders who had killed their neighbors. When Breckinridge argued for the perimeter, he was arguing from grief. When Aldridge argued against it, he was arguing from compassion. And the terrible thing, the thing that the committee hearing revealed and the Senate debate confirmed and the political aftermath made permanent, was that both of them were right. The perimeter had worked. 8 years of absolute enforcement had deterred military incursion. No raider had tested the boundary since its establishment. The frontier colonies were safe, the safety was real, and the safety was built on the order that I had broken. And the order that I had broken had also killed 2,000 refugees. And both of those facts existed simultaneously, and neither one canceled the other. Breckinridge came to Kessler. He didn't have to. Senators don't visit border stations, but he came and he walked the cluster, and he looked at the refugees, and he stood in front of the juvenile group that was still building their model of Vetha, larger now, more detailed, incorporating materials from the new station, and he stood there for 10 minutes without speaking. Then he came to the operations center, where I was on watch. Corporal Maddox. Senator. You're the one. I'm one of 4, Senator. The decision was shared. But you were the first. I was the first to refuse. Sergeant Voss was the first to decide. Breckinridge sat down in the chair beside the sensor console. He was a big man, tall, broad, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent time on a frontier world where the weather wasn't gentle. He folded his hands on his knees and looked at the display. My son was 7 when the Selvari hit Kalis III, he said. He was in school when the kinetic strike landed half a kilometer from the building. The building didn't collapse, the strike wasn't close enough for that. But the pressure wave blew out every window and my son spent 4 hours under his desk, covered in glass, waiting for someone to come get him. He was 7. I said nothing. He's 15 now, he doesn't go near windows, won't sit with his back to one, sleeps in the center of his room, away from the walls. 8 years and he still flinches when a transport breaks the sound barrier over the settlement. I'm sorry, Senator. I built my career on that flinch, on making sure no other child on a Terran world has to spend 4 hours under a desk covered in glass. The perimeter is how I keep that promise. Every station, every weapon, every operator, they're the distance between my son and the next strike. I understand. Do you? Because what you did, what you and your crew did, you broke the wall I built to protect my son. You looked at the wall and you decided it wasn't worth the cost, and you opened a hole in it. And now I'm standing here trying to figure out whether the hole makes my son safer or less safe. I turned to face him fully. Senator, I've thought about this every day for 4 months, and I don't have a clean answer. The wall kept your son safe. The wall also killed 2,000 people who were trying to reach safety themselves. Both of those things are true, and I can't make one of them untrue by pointing at the other. So what do you do with that? I carry it. I carry the 2,000 I killed and the 1,100 I saved and the 31,000 who came after. And I carry the knowledge that your son's safety and their survival might not be compatible. And I carry the fact that I chose their survival and I don't know if that was right. You don't know? I know it was necessary. I know I couldn't fire. I know the order had broken me and was breaking my crew, and would have broken every operator on the perimeter eventually. But necessary and right are not always the same thing, and I am not arrogant enough to pretend I've solved a problem that the entire Senate has been arguing about for 4 months. Breckenridge looked at me for a long time. Then he nodded. Not agreement, but acknowledgement. The nod of a man who has heard something honest and recognizes it as such, even when it doesn't resolve his own dilemma. I'm going to vote against the revocation, he said. Not because I want those people dead, because I made a promise to a 7-year-old boy under a desk and I can't break it. I understand, Senator. But I'm going to lose. I think you are. And when I lose, and the corridor opens and the perimeter becomes something other than what it was, I need to know that the new thing is strong enough, that whatever replaces the wall can still keep my son safe. I can't promise that. No, you can't. He stood. He looked at the display one more time. But you can build it. You and your crew, you're the ones who broke the old thing. Build the new one. Build it so that my son and those children out there building their city can both sleep safely. That's the only outcome I can accept. He left. I sat in the operations center and thought about a 15-year-old boy who doesn't go near windows and 38 children building a model of a city out of hull scraps. And I understood, not for the first time but more clearly than before, that the cost of what I'd done was not located in my engagement log or my legal status or my career. The cost was located in the space between two kinds of safety that might not be able to coexist, and the work of my life going forward would be trying to make them coexist anyway. The Senate voted to revoke the standing enforcement order 6 weeks later. The vote was 73 to 41. Senator Breckenridge voted against. Senator Aldridge voted for. The margin was decisive but not overwhelming, reflecting a civilization that was divided not between right and wrong, but between two legitimate fears, the fear of what comes through the door, and the fear of what you become when you kill everything that does. The replacement framework was called the Territorial Integrity and Humanitarian Response Protocol, TIHRP, which everyone immediately abbreviated to the Corridor, because bureaucratic acronyms are the natural enemy of human communication. The Corridor maintained the sovereignty of the Terran boundary. Ships entering Terran space without prior clearance were still in violation. But the response was no longer lethal. Instead, unauthorized vessels were intercepted, escorted to designated processing stations, and their passengers were assessed security screening, medical evaluation, status determination. Those fleeing genuine humanitarian emergencies were granted temporary protected status. Those with other purposes were detained and processed under standard immigration and security protocols. It was not elegant. It was not perfect. The processing stations were overwhelmed within weeks. The security screening protocols were contested by civil liberties advocates on one side and defense hawks on the other. The frontier colonies complained about the burden. The inner systems complained about the cost, but no one was dying at the line. Kessler Station became the primary processing facility for the Kessler Corridor. It was expanded twice in the first year: additional modules, additional capacity, additional personnel. The original 4-person crew of KBS-7 was disbanded. Voss was promoted to Master Sergeant and assigned to the station's Operations Directorate. Olin was offered a position in the Sensor Intelligence Division and accepted. Dunn was recruited by the Engineering Corps, who had recognized his field innovations and wanted him to help design the next generation of modular life support systems. And I was offered a choice. Vice Admiral Morrison made the offer personally during his second visit to the Kessler system, 6 months after the Senate vote. Corporal Maddox, the investigation into your crew's actions has been formally concluded. No charges will be filed. Your engagement record for the period prior to the stand-down has been reviewed and confirmed as lawful under the orders in effect at the time. The engagement record stands. The stand-down is being classified as a whistleblower action under the military conscience provision. You and your crew will receive formal commendations. Commendations, sir? For identifying a systemic failure in the enforcement protocol and taking action to prevent further casualties. Sir, with respect, I didn't identify a systemic failure. I broke. The system broke you, Corporal. That's the systemic failure. The commendation reflects the fact that when the system broke its operators, the operators chose to break the system instead of each other. That's the provision it's designed for. And the choice? You can accept the commendation, take a promotion, and be reassigned to any posting in the fleet. Or, Morrison paused. Or you can stay here. The new Kessler station needs a humanitarian liaison officer, someone to coordinate between the refugee processing operation and the perimeter stations that are still maintaining the surveillance boundary. The job requires someone who understands both sides of the line, someone who has operated the weapons and chosen not to fire, someone the perimeter crews will listen to because he's been where they are. You want me to talk to the operators? I want you to be available to them. The new protocol doesn't fire on refugees, but the operators still watch them approach. They still track them on sensors for 12 hours. They still see the ships getting worse. And they still carry the knowledge that the weapon is there, and the authority is there. And the only thing between the trigger and the target is a policy decision that could be reversed at any time. That's a heavy job, sir. It's the job you've been doing for 14 months, Corporal. The difference is that now you'd be doing it on purpose. I thought about Voss's network, the 40 or 50 former perimeter operators who checked in with each other across the fleet, making sure everyone was still here. I thought about Tyler Brandt, who almost wasn't still here, and Ethan Marsh, who'd started talking to bulkheads, and all the others whose names I didn't know but whose experience I shared. I'll stay, I said. Morrison nodded. There's one more thing. Thessan Orn has been appointed by the Rithani Refugee Council as their primary representative to the Terran administration. He specifically requested that his Terran counterpart be you. Me. He says you're the only person on the Terran side who understands that the line and the name have to exist in the same sentence. I accepted the position. I was promoted to sergeant. I was assigned quarters on the new station. And I began the work that has consumed every day of the 2 years since the work of standing at the boundary, not with a weapon, but with a protocol and a set of questions, trying to build a perimeter that can hold a civilization's fear and a refugee's desperation simultaneously without crushing either one. 2 years in, and I still can't sleep through the night. Not every night. Some nights are fine. Some nights the fatigue from the day's work is heavy enough to push everything below the surface. And I sleep, and I dream about things that are not the perimeter, and I wake, and for a few seconds the weight is lighter. But some nights, the nights after a sensor contact that reminds me of the old pattern, or a processing case that involves a ship too damaged to have made the crossing, or a conversation with one of the perimeter operators who's calling, because they can't sleep either some nights, the weight reasserts itself with a specificity that no amount of protocol or purpose can absorb. On those nights I go to the observation deck. The Kessler cluster is gone now. The original collection of refugee ships and improvised connections was disassembled months ago. The ships either scrapped or returned to the Rithani for reuse. But KBS-7 is still there, dark and empty, anchored at its Lagrange point like a memorial that nobody officially designated. I can see it from the observation deck, a small angular shape against the starfield, the mining platform that was my home and my weapon, and the place where I broke, and the place where I rebuilt. I go to the observation deck and I look at KBS-7 and I think about the cloud. The cloud is gone. The debris field, the ionized remains of 109 ships and approximately 2,000 people, has long since dispersed below any detection threshold. The corridor is clean. The sensors show nothing. The space where Korev-san and the others were converted to gas is indistinguishable from any other volume of interstellar vacuum. But I know where it is. I know the coordinates. I carry them the way Thessan Orn carries the map of Vetha, and Voss carries the school children, and Dunn carries the meal ration he watched a 4-year-old eat with unfamiliar hands. I carry them because someone should, and because the alternative, letting the coordinates become abstract, letting the cloud disperse from my mind the way it dispersed from the sensors, would be the final act of the killing, the last step, the one that turns the dead into data and the data into silence. I will not be silent about this. This record, this account, this confession, this testimony, whatever it is, exists because I need it to exist. Not for absolution, not for sympathy, not for the political argument which is settled, or the legal argument which was never filed, or the strategic argument which will be debated by people with more stars on their shoulders until long after I'm dead. This record exists because Korev-san said his name on an open channel and I fired anyway. And somewhere in the dispersed particles of the Kessler corridor, his name is still encoded in the molecular pattern of what he was, And I owe it to that pattern to say what happened here. All of it. The killing and the stopping, the order and the refusal, the wall and the hole in the wall, the old perimeter and the new one, the cost of both. Thessan Orn and I still work together, every day. The work is not glamorous logistics, processing, coordination, the endless administrative labor of managing a system that receives frightened people and converts them into documented residents. It is infrastructure work, the kind of work Thessan Orn did in Vetha, and the kind of work that keeps civilizations alive by being so mundane that no one notices it until it stops. We don't talk about the crossing often, not because it's forbidden, but because the work absorbs the conversation the way it absorbs everything else. The operational present is so demanding that the retrospective past has to wait, and it waits, and it waits, and sometimes a week goes by without either of us mentioning the thing that connects us. But sometimes at the end of a shift when the processing center is empty and the next convoy isn't due for hours, Thessan Orn will come to the observation deck and find me looking at KBS-7, and he will stand beside me, and neither of us will say anything for a while. And then he will ask, "How many today?" And I will know he doesn't mean how many were processed, or how many arrived, or how many were cleared for resettlement. He means how many am I carrying tonight? How many of the 2,000 are with me on the observation deck? How heavy is the specific weight of what I did before I stopped doing it? And I will tell him a number or a name, or sometimes just the word many, and he will nod, and we will stand there together, the executioner and the survivor, looking at the station where the order died and the corridor opened, and neither of us will try to make the other feel better, because the truth is more valuable than comfort, and always has been. The informal network that Voss told me about, the former perimeter operators, grew after the Kessler incident. When I was assigned the liaison position, I formalized it. Not into a bureaucratic structure, the operators would have rejected that. Into a communication channel. A frequency, dedicated, encrypted, available to any current or former perimeter operator who needed to talk to someone who understood. I called it the Brandt Channel, after Tyler Brandt, who almost wasn't still here. Within 6 months, 43 operators had connected. Within a year, 71. By the 2-year mark, 114 current and former perimeter operators were on the Brandt Channel, and the conversations that happened there were the most important work I did, more important than the processing logistics, more important than the refugee coordination, more important than any of the administrative functions that my official position described. Because the operators were still watching. The new protocol didn't fire on refugees. But the operators still sat at the sensor consoles. They still tracked inbound contacts. They still watched the blue dots approach the line. And they still felt the weight of the weapon behind them. The weapon that was in safe mode, not dismantled. The weapon that was suspended, not removed. The weapon that still existed and could be reactivated. And the knowledge of its presence was itself a kind of carrying. A young specialist on station KBS-3 called me at 0200 one night. His name was Brandon Cole. He was 20 years old. He had been on the perimeter for 4 months, since before the revocation, and he had killed 14 ships under the old order. "Sergeant Maddox?" "I'm here, Cole." "I can't." His voice was the voice of someone standing on the edge of something. Not hysteria, not breakdown. Just the flat, compressed sound of a person who has been holding a door shut for a long time and is feeling the hinges give. "I can't stop counting." "Counting what?" "The ones I killed. I know their numbers. The engagement log numbers. I know them in order. KBS-3-ENG-041 through KBS-3-ENG-054. 14 engagements. I know the dates, the times, the ranges, the weapon cycling intervals. I can recite them. I can recite them in my sleep. I recite them in my sleep." "Brandon, listen to me." "I'm listening." "The counting is normal. It's what the perimeter does. It puts numbers in your head and the numbers don't leave." "When do they leave?" "They don't." Silence. I could hear him breathing. The sound of a 20-year-old kid on a 4-person station in the void carrying 14 kills that were legal and correct and grinding him to powder. "Brandon, I have 109. "What?" 109 engagements. That's my count. I know all of them too. I know them in order. I know the dates and the times and the ranges. I know which ones were at night and which ones were during shift change and which ones I completed while eating a meal ration. I know all of it. And it doesn't leave. Then how do you? I don't make it leave. I make it mean something. I take the weight and I put it into the work. Every refugee I process, every operator I talk to, every hour I spend on this frequency, that's the weight being used. Not redeemed, not forgiven, used. The dead can't benefit from what I do now, but the living can. And the living are the only currency I have. That's not enough. No, it's not, but it's what there is. Cole was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Sergeant, I need to tell you something." "Go ahead." "My last engagement ship, 54, the pilot tried to surrender. Open channel, universal distress frequency, in standard. He said I yield, 3 times, and I fired anyway, because the order didn't recognize surrender. The order said fire. And I fired. I know. How? Because the order didn't recognize surrender. That's the order. It didn't recognize names. It didn't recognize children. It didn't recognize yield. It recognized the line, and everything on the wrong side of the line was a target, and targets get destroyed. You followed the order. I followed the order, and I hear him say yield every night. I hear Korev-san say his name every night. That's the frequency we're on, Cole. That's the branch channel. We're all hearing something. We talked for 4 hours. I don't remember all of it. The conversations blur after a while, because the specifics change but the substrate is the same. The weight, the counting, the sound that doesn't stop. The search for a way to carry it that doesn't involve putting it down, because putting it down would mean forgetting. And forgetting would be the last violence, the final act of the killing that the living owe the dead the decency of refusing. Brandon Cole stayed on the perimeter. He stayed on the branch channel. He is, as of this record, still here. Still here. The children finished it. 8 months after their arrival, the 38 Rithani juveniles who had been building a model of Vetha out of hull scraps completed it. The model filled an entire compartment of Kessler Station, a room that had been designated as a common area but had been gradually, without formal authorization, surrendered to the children's project as it expanded beyond any single surface. The model was extraordinary. Not in its artistry, though it was, in fact, beautifully made, with a precision that spoke to hours of careful work by hands that remembered every street, every building, every public space of a city they'd never see again. What made it extraordinary was its completeness. The children had rebuilt Vetha from memory, and their collective memory was more detailed than any individual could have produced, because each child remembered a different part: the market where one had accompanied an adult, the school another had attended, the park where a third had played, the water treatment facility where a fourth's parent had worked. They'd labeled everything. In Rithani script, and increasingly in Standard, the children were learning Standard faster than the adults, the way children learn languages, by absorption rather than study. The labels were simple. Some were names of places, some were names of people, some were descriptions. One label, attached to a small building near the center of the model, read, "This is where Korev lived." I found it on a Tuesday afternoon. I was passing through the common area on my way to the processing center, and I stopped, because the name on the label was a name I knew, and the coincidence was too precise to be coincidental. Thessan. He was nearby. He was always nearby when the children were working on the model, not supervising but present, the quiet attendance of a man who understood that what the children were building was not a model, but a memorial. Yes? This building. The label says, "This is where Korev lived." Korev-san. His family lived in the residential district near the central atmospheric processor, building 4117. These children knew him? His son is one of the builders, Reeve-san. He's the one who started the project. I looked at the model, at building 4117, at the careful, precise construction of a structure that represented the home of a man I had killed. Which one is Reeve? Thessan Orn pointed. One of the juveniles, one of the ones from the original crossing, one of the 4 I'd seen in the airlock, was working on a section of the model near the edge. He was about 6 years old in equivalent terms. He was carefully attaching a small piece of hull material to a structure, his concentration absolute, his hand steady. He was Korev-san's son, the man I'd killed. Ship 38, The first name. The one that cracked the armor but wasn't enough. Korev-san, who said his name on an open channel, who broadcast his citizen registration number, who told me he was carrying 19 passengers including 4 juveniles, who told me he couldn't turn back. One of those 4 juveniles was his son, and his son had survived the crossing not on his father's ship because his father's ship was plasma, but on a different ship, in a different group, reaching the corridor months later and crossing the boundary after I had already broken, already stopped, already let Thessan Orn through. Korev-san's son was alive because I stopped killing. Korev-san was dead because I didn't stop soon enough. I stood in the common area, surrounded by the model of Vetha, and I felt the full weight of both of those facts settle into the exact same place in my chest, and the place couldn't hold them both, and it had to hold them both, and it did because that is what the living do. They hold things that can't be held, and they keep standing, and they don't set the weight down. Thessan Orn was watching me. He knew. He'd known since the beginning, since the airlock, since the observation deck, since every conversation we'd had where the weight was acknowledged but never resolved. He knew that resolution was not available, that the arithmetic of the dead and the living would never balance, that the only honest posture was to carry both columns without pretending they could be reconciled. "Do you want to meet him?" Thessan Orn asked. "No." "Why not?" "Because I killed his father, and he doesn't know that. And telling him serves no purpose except making my guilt into his burden. He will learn. Eventually. The records are public. When he's older, he'll access the engagement logs and he'll find ship 38 and he'll know. Then he'll find me, and I'll answer. But I won't go to him. I won't make a child carry my reckoning." Thessan Orn nodded. He didn't argue. He didn't agree. He just accepted the decision with the same steady attention he applied to everything the infrastructure of other people's moral architecture, observed and understood and left alone. I walked past the model. I walked past Building 4117. I walked past Reeve-san, who didn't look up from his construction, who didn't know I was the person who had turned his father into a cloud of gas in the corridor, who was building his home from memory with hands that were steady and small and alive. And I went to the processing center, and I processed 17 arrivals, and I coordinated with 3 perimeter stations, and I talked to a 22-year-old operator on KBS 9 who was calling in because he'd had a dream about the ships and couldn't get back to sleep. And I carried the day, and the day was heavy, and the day was mine, and I carried it. 3 years in, the Rethani refugee crisis has stabilized. The consortium's internal collapse slowed, not reversed, not healed, but slowed, the way a hemorrhage slows when the body finds its own clotting factors. The northern provinces are still devastated. Vetha is still uninhabitable, but the mass displacement has peaked and the flow through the Kessler corridor has diminished from thousands per month to dozens per week. The perimeter is still there, the stations are still crewed, the weapons are still mounted, but the standing order is gone, replaced by the corridor protocol, and the weapons are in safe mode, and the operators watch the sensors and track the contacts and guide the ships to the processing stations, and the killing has stopped. I don't know if it will stay stopped. That's not the kind of guarantee the universe offers. Senator Breckenridge's fear is not irrational. The perimeter served a deterrent function, and the deterrent function is diminished, and somewhere in the galactic arm, there may be an opportunist calculating whether the Terran boundary can be tested now that the teeth have been filed. That fear is real. That vulnerability is real. And the work of maintaining safety while refusing to kill is harder than the work of maintaining safety through killing. Because killing is simple and definitive, and the alternative is complicated and permanent. But the model of Vetha is still growing. The children have expanded it. New arrivals bring new memories, refugees who knew parts of the city that the original builders didn't, who remember buildings and streets and people that the first group had lost. The model is now the most complete representation of Vetha that exists anywhere, more detailed than the consortium's own records, which were corrupted during the collapse, more accurate than any orbital survey, because it was built by the people who lived there and carries the precision of personal experience. Thessan Orn told me that the children have started adding a new section, not Vetha, not any Rethani city. They're building a model of Kessler Station, the station where they arrived, the station where they were received, the station that the person who was supposed to kill them built to keep them alive instead, They're building it beside Vetha, connected by a small corridor, a bridge between the city they lost and the station they found. The bridge is made of the same hull scraps as everything else, but it's painted. Blue, green, and white. Colors that Thessan Orn says are the Rethani symbolic colors for safe passage. I don't know what to do with that information. I don't know how to carry the fact that the children of the people I killed are building a model of the thing I built to save their successors and painting it in the colors of safety. The weight of that is different from the weight of the killing lighter in one direction, heavier in another, distributed across a geometry that doesn't map to any axis I understand. So I carry it the way I carry everything. In the work, in the hours, in the specific, unremarkable labor of standing at the line every day and choosing, again and again, to keep it a boundary rather than a blade. Voss messaged me last night. From his new posting 3 systems away, where he runs the operations directorate for the Regional Humanitarian Logistics Network, the system that coordinates supply distribution across all the Kessler Corridor processing facilities. The message was 2 sentences. Still here. Are you? I replied, still here. That's the branch channel. That's the frequency. The shortest, most complete communication possible between people who understand what the perimeter was and what it cost and what it's becoming. Still here, 2 words, the most honest report I know how to make. This is how I end this record, not with resolution because there isn't one, not with wisdom, because I don't have any that isn't also a wound, not with the clean, definitive closure that stories are supposed to have, because this isn't a story, it's a confession, and confessions don't end. They just reach the point where the speaker has said everything they can say, and the silence begins, and the silence is the rest of your life. I am Sergeant James Maddox. I am 26 years old. I operate the Humanitarian Liaison Office at Kessler Station, and I am responsible for the welfare of the perimeter operators who watch the boundary I use to enforce with lethal force. I have killed approximately 2,000 people. I carry their weight in my body, in my sleep, in the coordinates of a dispersed gas cloud that the sensors can no longer detect, but that I will never stop knowing. The weight does not get lighter. Thessan Orn was right about that. It distributes differently. Some days it's in my hands and I can't hold a meal ration without thinking of Korev-san. Some days it's in my chest and I can't breathe past it. Some days it's nowhere I can locate, a phantom presence, the gravitational pull of a mass I can't see. But I am still here, and the corridor is open, and the children are building. And Dunn's footnote is in the engineering specifications, and Oland's sensors are tracking ships that will not be fired upon, and Voss is managing supply lines that carry food instead of ordnance, and somewhere on this station, Reeve-san Korev-san's son is painting a bridge between 2 models in the colors of safe passage, and he doesn't know who I am, and someday he will. And I will answer him honestly, and the answer will not be enough, and I will give it anyway. The perimeter holds, not the old perimeter, the one that killed, the new one, the one that watches, the one that receives, the one that costs more to maintain because it requires its operators to do the harder thing, to see the ships coming and not fire, to watch the blue dots cross the line and respond with coordination instead of ordnance, to carry the weight of the weapon's presence without using the weapon's function. That perimeter holds because people hold it. People who chose, at the specific moment when the order and the conscience collided, to break the order and keep the conscience. People who were broken by the system and rebuilt themselves as something the system hadn't anticipated. People who discovered that the vulnerability of the perimeter, the fact that it was operated by beings who could hear names, was not a flaw, but the feature that saved it from becoming the thing it was built to prevent. The thing that saves your civilization is not the weapon you point at the door. It's the person behind the weapon who can still hear the name on the other side. And the person who can still hear the name is the person the weapon eventually breaks. And the breaking is not failure. It's the system working as designed. If the system was designed by something wiser than fear, I don't know if it was. I don't know if any of this was designed. I don't know if Korev-san saying his name on an open channel was an act of faith or desperation, or simple human Rethani in his case, but the word still applies insistence on being known before being destroyed. I know that he said it. I know that I heard it. I know that it wasn't enough to save him, but it was enough to save the ones who came after. And I know that the cloud where he dispersed is the same space where the corridor now runs, The open passage where ships cross freely, the gap in the wall that his name cracked, and Thessan Orn's name broke, and 1,000 subsequent names widened into something that can hold both fear and compassion in the same architecture. The corridor runs through his grave. The ships that cross it carry his name in their passage, whether they know it or not. And I carry it here, in this record, in the only currency I have, the admission that I am the person who fired, and the person who stopped, and both of those people are me. And neither one cancels the other. And the work of my life is not to resolve the contradiction but to inhabit it, daily, honestly, with the full weight of what I did and what I chose and what I cannot undo. Corporal James Maddox, Station KBS-7, 109 engagements. Sergeant James Maddox, Kessler Station, 0 engagements, 31,000 lives processed. Both of those service records are mine. I carry them both. I am still here. End of record.